Startled man sitting on the ground screamed loudly. Yaram enthusiastically raised her fist in the air, asking, "Well, did she repeat after the guy it was impossible to take a sip of cold water in front of the children? A bad example was contagious." The morning sun was rising over the city. The guy remembered that this is how Yaram became a member of the guild, and he was freed from captivity. The sleeping Yujin suddenly woke up and opened his eyes. He sat up on the bed and asked Yoyun, who had entered the room, what he was doing. His brother walked towards him, and the guy asked in surprise what was wrong with him, what had come over him since the morning. He looked in surprise at his brother's hand extended to him, who demanded that the guy give him what he bought yesterday. Frightened, Yujin jabbered, asking, he was talking about shopping at the mall. He spent too much, but he thought he was allowed to spend all this money. The younger one shouted that that was not the point, but the black poison fog orb. The eldest held out the ball in his palm, but before he even had time to clarify, his brother grabbed it and squeezed it in his fist. Surprised, Yujin asked why, and then corrected himself and asked how he even knew he bought it. Yuyun looked at the palm, asking the elder does he not trust him at all. The guy looked at his brother, who made a surprised sound. Yujin started to ask what he was talking about, but was interrupted because Yuyun suddenly hugged him. A question was heard in the room. "What's wrong with the youngest?" Yuyun asked his brother if he bought it, being prepared even to die if necessary. Continuing to hug his brother, the younger one closed his eyes and continued that if his enemies targeted the older one, he would become his weak point. The guy said that this is why his brother was ready to poison himself so that they could not use him as a hostage. Yujin's face was extremely surprised, and he thought that there was nothing like that. The guy began to deny, and the younger brother let him go and looking into his eyes said that he was so worried about him, but he still should never use something like that. The beaming Yuyun confidently stated that even if something like this happened, he would definitely come to save him. Yujin thought he bought it to use when clearing the dungeon alone, without his brother's knowledge, but now he can't say he has L-class poison resistance. But Yujin agreed out loud and thanked his brother. He had the feeling that there were more and more misunderstandings. The elevator arrived at floor B1. Yujin looked at his brother and asked if everything had already been resolved with Yaram, to which Yuyun replied that yes, Seok went to her house yesterday. The younger one looked forward, saying that, apparently, the guardian spent billions of the girl's inheritance on his own business. He remembered the picture of a man in a suit, handing a paper to a disgruntled, screaming guardian. The guy said that in exchange for the fact that they would not sue, he wrote a receipt that under no circumstances would he approach or contact the girl. He won't interfere anymore. The guild has success. The guy stepped forward, leaving the elevator, and the eldest asked, Yaram really agreed not to sue, but what about the inheritance of her parents? To this, the younger replied that yes, she said that she simply did not want to contact him anymore. Yujin scratched his neck and agreed, saying that now that amount would rather seem ridiculous, and Yuyun looked at his smartphone and said that the girl had also gradually finished adapting to her abilities and seemed to have spent all of last night in the training room. Above the entrance to the room, there was a sign stating that this was a training room. Yuyun said that this room can withstand even the power of S rank, so she can use it as much as she wants. The guys froze at the entrance to the hall, which was simply destroyed, with fragments of blocks and broken stones lying inside. They saw destroyed walls, large dents, and cracks. Suddenly, a piece of concrete support fell next to the amazed guys. Yujin confusedly asked that this hall can withstand the power of S rank, to which Yuyun sheepishly said that yes, but against the background of a large crack in the wall, a rod, broken off from its fastening, flew past and fell. Among the fragments of tiles and concrete, Yaram quickly rushed headfirst, holding a chain in her hands. Somersaulting in the air, she landed and slammed her palm onto the floor. The black punching bag swayed. Releasing the ice from her fist, the hooded girl swung her second fist. Surrounded by small ice flows, she used the Shadowless Day skill. Yaram stamped her foot, and black rays of power rushed across the floor from her foot. The guys looked around, and Yujin asked in surprise what happened to the training room. Did something really happen to Yaram? He looked down in surprise. A black shadow from the girl rushed towards his leg, gluing it to the floor, and the guy said in surprise that he could not move. The girl looked intently and said the command to activate the skill. The fragments of stone were covered with a black sticky substance. Like the training barbell, blue fumes rose from the black marks. Covered in a black mass up to his shoulders, Yujin screamed, and his brother called out to him in surprise. Black shadows swirling across the floor connected with the girl, who put her fist to her chest. Yaram raised her foot, the sole of her shoe glowing blue. Surrounded by the radiance, she slammed her foot down to the ground, breaking the floor. Yaram quickly ran forward, and her steps crumbled the tiles on the floor. With a scream, the girl raised her fist to strike, and she hit the floor with her fist, raising not only blue shining flashes, but also fragments of stones. Cracks from the floor even spread to the walls of the training room. The girl stood confidently, clenching her fists glowing with blue power. Suddenly she heard her brother's requests to wake up. Surprised, she turned to the guy she called uncle. She was amazed to see Yuyun, who, holding White Yujin on his knees, asked him not to die, and told the girl that she had become stronger. Yaram screamed for the guy to come to his senses. They shook White Yujin by the shoulders, bringing him to his senses suddenly. The guy opened his eyes, looking at her in surprise. Yujin adjusted her hood and excitedly asked if her uncle was okay, to which he asked who she was. The girl thought in surprise that he had lost his memory and asked if he didn't remember she was Yaram, to which Yujin shouted that he knew, but she had changed beyond recognition, and the surprised Yuyun said that the stylist had worked with her. The girl beamed, as if against the backdrop of refreshing lemonade, smiled, standing in a confident pose with a new haircut, and said that World's Edge had corrected her image. Because she would soon be going to the Hunter Association, Yujin said it suits her. All sports drink advertisements will be. Smiling contentedly, she imagined Hermes, thinking that this was his style combined with her skill, and said that she would be live, so she needed to follow the picture. The guy asked in surprise that they also do something like this, and then remembered that S rank is for celebrities. The folder contained the girl's documents and her photograph. She said that she had already prepared documents for registering the hunter, which would need to be provided. She constantly signs something and at the same time sorts out her skills. Holding a folder with documents in her hands, Yaram smiled shyly and said that she didn't notice the guy coming in, to which he replied, those were indeed her skills, but what are they? The girl imagined icy whirlwinds flying forward and said that the first one was a freezing sigh. He saw it last time. A circle with symbols appeared under the girl's foot, and she said that Hermes' shoes allow you to fly and instantly move short distances. The girl presented a skill in which black shadows emanated from her and said that shadowless they applied a boost to a wide area. Yaram said that when using it, the effectiveness of skills and attributes greatly increases, and she can also slow down the enemy by absorbing his shadow, which also gives. Yujin held her documents and asked that she becomes even stronger by absorbing power from her surroundings. He realized that it was because of this skill that the training hall had turned into ruins. Yaram, thoughtfully, said that there is another skill, the last one, White Corpse, which allows you to read information from a corpse. Yujin listened carefully. Thoughtful, he said that it was quite creepy, and the girl scratched the back of her head and confirmed, saying that it was supposed to be an attack skill. The thoughtful voice of Yujin was heard in the office, who said that they would hide White Corpse for now, and the girl asked again in surprise. The brunette held her documents and pen in his hands and explained that it was not necessary to disclose all the skills when registering. The blue-haired girl listened attentively to the guy who was correcting the data in her documents, saying that since this happened, it would be better to hide a few more details. For example, in Shadowless Day, you can only record the effect of sitting, and in Hermes' shoes, only flying, which is suit. She smiled joyfully, touching the guy's hand, and said that he was so good at this. Like a specialist, Yuyun looked on in surprise as his brother smiled at the compliment and asked if she had mastered power control. The younger shielded the surprised brother with himself and told the surprised girl that he was so well aware of everything because for his sake, he delved into all the details and advised her to keep his distance. Yujin watched in confusion as Yaram angrily asked the head of the guild that she was not addressing him and why he was interfering, to which the guy said that he did not interfere, but helped his older brother with an explanation. The eldest sheepishly scratched his cheek with his finger, thinking with a chuckle that this is really possible, so everything will be okay. Many photographers gathered near the tall multi-story glass building. Yaram got out of the car under camera flashes. She smiled and walked past cameras, phones and voice recorders pointed at her. Park Yaram, the new S rank, is released. The photographers were taking pictures of the girl, and behind her stood two dark figures. The reporter said that this is the birth of the 8th S rank combat hunter in the country. Yaram only has 3 starting skills. Yujin, wearing a mask and cap, peeked around the corner standing next to Seonghin and said that the girl was doing well, to which the defender replied that instead of acting like that, he should just accompany her. Seong Han folded his arms and said that Yaram was upset because Eugene didn't go with her, and the guy laughed and replied that he has a lot of bad memories of crowded places. Pulling off the mask from his face, Eugene said that resentment has its end. Now that fame and fortune awaits her, it will surely fade into the background. The man remained silent, looking at him. And the guy said that the main thing is that everything will be fine. This pleases me the most. Eugene thought the changes were too big. He remembered the serious girl with long hair surrounded by ice, and thought that there was no trace left of the cold and arrogant Yaram from the future, whom he knew. The real girl with the new hairstyle was smiling widely. The guy thought that now instead of her, there was a Yaram high school student imbued with a confident smile. He remembered the monster with eyes between the tentacles that came out of the gate, and thought that the dungeon breakthrough that happened a few days ago also did not happen in the first place. Will everything be okay if the future he saw changes so much? Eugene straightened his cap, shook his head, and thought that what difference does it make? What's good is good. What's important now is different. Since he came to the association, he needs to see if there are any newcomers with good potential here. The guy peeked around the corner, looking at the crowd. Letters appeared above the people indicating their class. The guy saw that there was F rank, E rank. He chuckled and thought that finding another S rank would be a huge success. Eugene looked at the people carefully, thinking that he was unlikely to find anything here. What kind of high-level awakened would just walk around here? Suddenly he took off and ran, and Seong-hin looked at him in surprise, asking where he was going. The guy thought that nothing was impossible. He imagined how the crystals of the precious stones sparkled in his palms. He remembered that it all started with the fact that he actually turned back time to save his younger brother. Once he was able to change everything for the better for Yaram and for him and Yu-yun. He saw the figure of a guy with long hair. The guy thought that perhaps his gift had been given to him. Eugene grabbed the guy's wrists. As he ran, his cap and mask flew off. The stranger turned to look at him in surprise, and the guy thought he was needed to make the uncut diamond that caught his eye shine. The long-haired guy looked in surprise, asking who he was. System information, meanwhile, informed Eugene that the guy was an awakened named Jum Young-woo. Current class F, awakening potential F, the optimal starting skill possible for learning SS rank. A guy with long hair and a backpack put on the other way, asked in surprise who it was, and Eugene confidently asked, "He's Myung-woo, Yu Myung-woo. Haven't seen him for a long time. He doesn't remember him. It's Eugene, Han Eugene." The long-haired man rubbed his neck in embarrassment and apologized, saying that he really didn't remember him. The guy smiled broadly, waving his hands, and said that everything was fine. They had not seen each other for a long time. This was quite natural, but he himself thought that, to be honest, he didn't know him either. A blue circle of the ability used appeared in Eugene's eye. He saw an image of an anvil and hammer icon, and the name of the skill master of the golden smithy. He thought, this is incredible, just look at this guy's skill. An image of an ancient blacksmith working on a golden anvil appeared in his head. Eugene thought that from the name alone, it was clear that this was a special skill related to the manufacture of equipment. Moreover, SS rank. Eugene reflected that the S-onk blacksmith who personally creates equipment. That the guy imagined an embarrassed Myung-woo surrounded by gold, guards, money, and thought that if he managed to acquire this skill, he could build himself a bed from bags of money from all over the world. The guy with the backpack looked rather embarrassed, and Eugene thought that it was all through this man, who looked like a runt depressed by life's difficulties. The elder looked at the guy's documents, asking if everything was fine with him. Did he also wake up? The long-haired one sheepishly replied that yes, although F rank, they give 1,000,000 in subsidies for registering an awakened one. Myung-woo held documents with his information in his hand, and Eugene exclaimed that he was also an F rank. The guy asked if he would go with him to get basic training. Smiling, the long-haired man said that he only came for a subsidy. You have to pay for basic training, but F rank and it are not needed anywhere. It is now worthless. Eugene grabbed the guy's palm with both hands. Looking at him with enthusiasm, the brunette smiled and invited him to study with him in their guild. Eugene said that he would get it for free. One word from him, but suddenly Seong-hin grabbed him by the collar, and Young-woo looked at it in surprise. The guard told the guy that only members of the guild could receive training for new hunters. Myung-woo looked at this picture in surprise, asking, "Is this Seong-han from World's Edge?" Eugene asked to make an exception for just one person, and the defense lawyer referred to the charter. He asked the guy who was hanging in the hands of a serious man, like a kitten, if they knew each other, and how. Smiling confidently, Eugene pointed a finger at himself and told the amazed guy that the head of the guild was his younger brother. Myung-woo covered his eyes with his hands and squinted, turning away from his interlocutors, asking about the head of World's Edge and saying that he suddenly began to blind his eyes. To which Yujin smiled contentedly and replied that it was a halo of power the elder said that he would put in a good. Myung-woo, still covering his eyes, asked that even equipment. Is it really possible? He held the guy's gloved hands and said he couldn't even remember him. Yujin held the embarrassed guy's palms and told him not to worry about it and just agree he wants to take care of him because Myung-woo is a good person. With an embarrassed smile, the brunette continued that he actually deserves such treatment. Looking at the guy with shining eyes, the long-haired one repeated what he really deserves. His eyes filled with tears. With sobs, he fell to his knees in front of Yujin, who called out to him in surprise. The brunette told the guy to drink some warm tea. There was a glass of tea in the machine. Yujin handed Myung-woo one of the glasses of tea, saying that it would, of course, be better to buy expensive coffee in some cafe, to which the long-haired man said that everything was fine, that was enough for him. Sitting with a glass of tea in his hands and looking down, Myung-woo answered positively when asked if he had calmed down. He wiped away the remaining tears with his finger and apologized for the fact that it was so unexpected he had not heard such words for too long. Yujin looked at him, saying that he had a hard time. Myung-woo smiled a little and began to tell me that as a child he had a talent for working with his ha. He remembered making a dinosaur with his hands while his classmates and teachers stood around him. Then he remembered people sitting at the university reading books and said that as an adult, this was of no use. Everyone just told him to stop fooling around and get down to studying. A pile of papers fell on the guy standing on top with a backpack in his hands. He said that that's when he went to the bottom. Because he was completely incompetent in his studies, he said that his grades at the university were terrible. He couldn't get a job, and there were also family circumstances. Looking into his glass of tea, Myung-woo said that at some point, he found himself in such a deplorable situation and with a lot of debt, like an outsider with nowhere to turn. The brunette sat next to him and listened to him. Then he lowered his gaze, saying that he understood him perfectly. Yujin thought that even after the world changed, everything remained the same. He remembered how one of the students bullied him, saying that he was F rank and dared to say something to D rank. He reflected that people are literally divided into classes. Then he remembered how they called out to him, asking where he was going to climb, and thought that only combat and healing skills were welcome. An image of a railroad appeared in his head, illustrating the idea that if he left this road, he would be F rank among hunters, F rank in society. He imagined Myung-woo standing alone in the dark and wondered what would have become of him in the original scenario. He would never have been able to rekindle his talent. Perhaps he would have continued to be the same. Yujin squeezed his knee with his palm and thought that everything was fine. Anyway, now he can. Jumping to his feet, he looked at the sunset sky and encouraged the guy. Turning to the surprised Myung-woo with a smile, he urged him not to become limp, because what difference does it make that others don't accept? After all, they live in a world in which it is difficult to survive alone. Putting his arm around the guy's shoulders, he pointed his finger forward and quoted the words that he should confidently raise his head. If he remains depressed, the money for the spine operation will also fly away. Myung-woo sat on the bench and watched as Yujin confidently raised his fists in the air, shouting that he is great and others just don't understand it. He loves himself. Turning around, he smiled and encouraged the guy to think like this. Looking at Myung-woo with a smile, he called him a friend and said that he loved him too. Myung-woo looked at the brunette with a confused look. Agreed, he said that they would do so, and thanked him. The system reported that the awakened Myung-woo received beneficial influence from the code word. The sun was setting and illuminated the city with golden rays. The guy thought that this would be solved so simply, but no. A serious man in glasses, the head of the HR department of World's Edge Simeon, confidently said that it is impossible. Yujin looked at him confused. They sat across from each other. At the table, Simeon put his hands on the potential newcomer's information and said that it was wrong to allow a stranger to receive training for guild newcomers. Yujin begged him to give in just once with a smile. Lost in thought, the man clasped his fingers and said that giving in and sending a person to training was the same as vouching for him. Myung-woo spat out his tea when he heard that there would be rumors that such a privilege was given to some dog bones lying around somewhere. Hyojin held his friend, who had fainted from embarrassment, and shouted that it was rude. What kind of dog bone? And Simeon adjusted his glasses, saying that he only meant that somewhere they could say that. Holding the white-faced guy, the brunette asked him to stop doubting and trust him for once, he really is an honest person. Simeon took off his glasses, covering his eyes, and said that, of course, he knows that Eugen has outstanding insight, that he found Yaram is already an incredible achievement. Then, adjusting his glasses on the bridge of his nose with his middle fingers, he concluded that it could just be an accident. Eugen exclaimed indignantly, "What kind of finger is this?" Tea was time for Eugen to spit out the coffee when the man said that, to be honest, he didn't understand his intentions. Especially considering that just a few days ago the guy was caught scamming a broker, the guy encouraged the head of the guild to do housekeeping, and now he's also getting promoted. Myung-woo imagined Eugen as a lady in a pink dress who is chased away from her son by a lady in green after hearing that it is highly undesirable to protect the safety of World's Edge. Upset, the guy thought that the brunette was being insulted because of him. Covering his face with his hands, the long-haired man ran out of the office, ignoring Eugen, who called out to him, telling the man to stop, he would just leave. The guy stood outside the building. The head's older brother grabbed his head, shouting that Simeon was getting tougher every time, and Myung-woo confirmed with a smile that he was a scary person. Eugen took the phone in his hands, saying that he would ask his little brother directly, and the long-haired one shook his head saying that there was no need. With a smile, he looked at the guy and said that he was valuable, that's enough. Eugen looked at his friend in surprise, who said that thanks to him, he had the will to live a little longer. Resolutely clenching his fist, the long-haired man said that he would not be discouraged and would try to do what he could. To be honest, in some places, they offered work for F ranks like him. A black car drove up to the pedestrian crossing. Eugen asked in surprise, "Where is it in this place?" The car stopped next to the guys, and Myung-woo confirmed that they said they would pick him up here. A big hand opened the car door. The man called Myung-woo. Three men with tattoos and angry looks looked out of the car. One of them asked that he had become a hunter, so now it was time to repay his debts, right? With an encouraging smile, Myung-woo looked at his friend and said that he would go, gain strength, earn money, and contact him again. Eugen looked at the people in the car in confusion, thinking, wait, this looks very dangerous. A shaven-headed man in tattoos put his arm around the guy's shoulders and with a menacing smile asked if their Myung-woo received a subsidy, to which the guy excitedly reached into his backpack, saying that yes, here it is. With a sharp movement, the man snatched the money from the guy's hand, laughingly saying that he knew that this was not enough at all. The men looked at Eugen, who looked into the car, asking who they were, the creditors, where were they taking Myung-woo. The strangers got angry and showed their teeth. The fat man with glasses asked if he would find out and what would he do. The excited guy smiled and said that he also wanted to go with him. The car roared along the road. The worried guys sat in the back seat next to a confident man in dark glasses and were silent. Unhappy, Eugen whispered to his friend that he borrowed money from terrible people, to which Myung-woo replied that the bank did not give him a loan, and then said that what is more important is why the guy followed him. He doesn't even have a debt. He excitedly heard his friend's counter-question about how he was supposed to let him go alone. The bandit looked at them, asking if they knew each other. Was he also awakened? Eugen turned around in fear and replied that yes, F rank. Myung-woo began to say that the guy was from World's Edge, but with a smile, his friend covered his mouth with his hand and said that they were childhood friends they met by chance in the Hunters Association. Eugen said that he learned from him that there is a job that takes F rank, so he became curious. The bespectacled bandit chuckled contentedly, saying that it had turned out well. The tattooed bandit sitting opposite them leaned towards them and asked with a smile if they would try to go to the dungeon together to get one magic stone for them. The man added that they know that guilds usually don't teach F rank. Eugen covered his mouth with his hand in admiration and asked if it was true when he heard that they were taking everyone, even F rank. Smirking, the bandit told the hero that since he was a friend of Myung-woo, they had a special relationship with him and asked if they would go together, to which Eugen resolutely clenched his fist and said that they would. With a sweet smile, the guy threw his hand behind his head, saying that at first he mistook them for scary men, but they turned out to be such good people. Hearing this, all the bandits in the car laughed loudly. One of the bandits, laughing, offered to immediately conclude a contract. With a wide smile, Eugen said that thanks to them, he would get a job, but he himself thought that this was a miner's contract. The guy remembered how he was in a gloomy dungeon with a pickaxe in his hands and thought that one day he himself fell for it. They send even F rank to the dungeon without experience and equipment and get collecting, while the rest of the guild members are hunting. Eugen thought that this wasn't a neck. Blood dripped onto the dirty floor of the dungeon, illustrating the guy's words that, if you're unlucky, being wounded or killed by a monster is quite common. Yujin looked at the guy who was looking ahead anxiously and thought, the future Myungwoo was trampled and died in such a place, never being able to reveal that talent. The driver of the car turned around and said that all they had to do was collect everything that looked worthwhile, and then they would become rich in no time. Yujin asked enthusiastically what was happening. You could just collect it. This is a real jackpot, but he thought to himself that they were scammers. The car was moving along the road. A conversation was heard from it. The guy asked where the office of their guild was and, having received the answer that it was in Myeongmokdong, exclaimed that it was not very far. A small brick building appeared, and the bandits said that they had arrived. Myungwoo was hiding behind Yujin, who admiringly said that Hope Errand Services is a good name. The man opened the doors with a grin and told them to come in. Going upstairs, the guy with an overly pleased smile said that although the building was outdated, he felt a future full of hope. Yujin walked between two bandits and, looking back, spoke that the office on the second floor has good lighting. He didn't have time to praise the stairs because someone else's foot pushed him in the back from behind. He exclaimed as he fell to the office floor. The men sitting in the office stopped eating and turned around, looking at the guy trying to get up. He smiled and tried to ask what pushed him from behind. But suddenly he noticed Myungwoo lying curled up on the floor, being kicked by two men. He jumped to his feet, shouting that they had started here, and the bandit, grinning, put his hand on his shoulder flashing his gold tooth. The man apologized that they had also brought him in without debt, but he had better regret that he came here voluntarily. The men, grinning evilly, looked at the guy who was holding his friend on his lap. One of them said that you can enter here of your own free will, but you cannot leave. Myungwoo wiped his face with his hand and asked the guy for forgiveness. Tears were flowing from the guy's eye. The second one was covered. He said that he had to go through this alone, and because of him, a debt-free friend also fell under the distribution. Yujin, looking at him, began to speak, calling his name, but someone's hand grabbed him by the shoulder, saying that they should come here. They need to conclude a contract now. The man sat the guy down on the sofa next to another bandit. Yujin looked in surprise at the contact sheet that was handed to him with the words that he should put his fingerprint on it. The head of the guild in a shirt and jacket held a glowing sheet of agreement in his hands and said that minus the commission, his profit is 20%, and since he has no debts, it means he will earn a lot of money. The paper glowed. Blue circles hovered around it. The man said that this is a special contract of the Awakened One. Unceremonious violation of its terms imposes a D-rank curse, so they should not even think of escaping by breaking it. The bandits surrounded Myungwoo and forcefully pulled his hand to the sheet and hurried him to put his fingerprint. Turning to the guild leader with a paper in his hands, Yujin said that he had a request. The man asked again displeasedly and said that even if he begged, it wouldn't work. Looking away in embarrassment, the guy squeezed the paper in, saying that this was not the case. Asked to compare the contracts, he said that it would be a shame if he had the same conditions as the guy, because he doesn't even have a debt. The bandits, along with the leader, stared at him in surprise, and then they laughed until they cried, saying that the guy was very attentive to detail. Yujin looked happily as the head handed him a glowing contract with the words that you need to live, thinking first of all about yourself. Let him check. The brunette was carefully reading the terms of the contract when he was asked what he would say. The guy reading the contract chuckled that Myungwoo would not be able to get more than 10%, and the grinning boss said that that's it, and these 10 will go to pay off the debt. Yujin exhaled that this was indeed a real slave contract. He took the paper with his fingers from both sides. The guy asked how dare they keep Myungwoo as a laborer or something like that. Looking confidently at the bandit, he tore the contract down the middle with both hands. The head and his subordinates stared at him in surprise, asking why he broke contact and what about the curse. Yujin looked at them carefully. The system reported that due to the termination of the contract, a level to debuff curse would be activated. The guy leaned his hand on the back of the sofa. The system notification stated that the debuff curse had been removed by level L curse resistance. Suddenly, Yujin kicked the guild master directly in the head. The bandit screamed, calling out to him. As they looked at this, the man held his head, closed one eye and yelled that this bad man was not F rank. Confidently clenching his fist, Yujin forcefully slammed his head into the floor with his other hand. The head lay defeated on the floor and cracks spread across the floor from his head. Confidently holding his hand, demonstrating his muscles, the guy said that he would start with the fact that he was really F rank and added to himself that he was in the best equipment. The bandit shouted, swinging sticks and fists, insulting him and saying that he would die here today. The men advanced, holding a heavy dumbbell in their hands. Myung-woo sat fearfully on the floor, behind the confident Yoo-jin. The brunette looked at them seriously, holding a smartphone in his hand, to which he was told that it was too late to call the police. Instead of answering, the guy showed them a screen where it was clear that he had been talking with Seong-han for 25 minutes and 37 seconds. They asked in surprise that this was not the police. Opening the locked office doors with his hands, an enraged Seong-han burst in with flaming eyes. And Yoo-jin, confidently holding the phone in his hand, stated that he had been following them for a long time. The bandits looked at the angry defender in surprise, asking what was going on. Seong-han frowned as he raised his fist to strike. The man's fist glowed. The bespectacled bandit asked that he had accomplices, even just one, but he didn't have time to finish. A powerful fist slammed into his stomach so hard that even his glasses came off. Everyone present in the room looked in surprise at the bandit, who flew far back from the powerful blow. They called out to him in alarm as his body fell to the floor with a crash. Myung-woo, sitting next to Yoo-jin, who was holding him down, asked in surprise how he did it while the voices shouted how dare they hit the head. Yoo-jin remembered how, smiling, he walked with the bandit in glasses and said that everything was simple. The guy's hand found the phone. He explained that from the moment they got into the car, he secretly pressed the call button. Seong-han looked carefully at his smartphone. Yoo-jin explained that this was enough for him to understand the situation, especially since he told in detail where exactly they were, so it was easy to find them. With a straight face, Seong-han was in the enemy's face. With a swing of his fist, he hit the next bandit. The bald, tattooed bandit sat next to the beaten brunette and gritted his teeth in anger as he addressed the guard. He grabbed a knife from behind his back. With insults and shouting that if the man did not stop, he ran at the defender, who turned on him with a knife. Myung-woo saw this and screamed in fear that no, this guy has a knife. The bandit stabbed Seong-han in the torso, and looking in shock, he made a surprise sound. The blade of the knife cut the fabric, but did not even scratch the torso of the man, who was shining with the strength of his muscles. The bandit said in surprise that this could not happen. How? Seong-han towered over him, dominating him with a scarlet aura of suppression, and raised his fingers folded to click above the bandit's head, saying that he should have taken a weapon worth a rank. From a click on the forehead, the criminal flew far back, and the man did not even change his face. An alarmed partner called out to the fallen bandit named Deok-soo, and another pointed a finger at the man, saying a rank, and then recognized him. Seong-han exhaled, turning his head to the side, and the bandit said that this Mr. Seong-han is from World's Edge. Looking fiercely at the bandits, the man ordered them to kneel down. The criminals, along with the gang leader, fell to their knees, and Seong-han calmly asked Myung-woo if he was injured, to which he received the answer that it was tolerable. Seong-han turned to Yoo-jin, asking what to do with them, to which the guy replied, "What do you have to think about? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth." The guy carefully read the papers with contracts that he held in his hands. He handed the gang leader a yellow sheet with an S-rank contact, telling him to sign it. The bandit excitedly read the contract, asking again what it was. A profit of 10%, a contract for 50 years. This is a complete fraud. Beaming and folding his palms in a sweet gesture, with a wide smile on his face, Yoo-jin said that it is too much to call it a scam. It is not a scam, but a super part-time job where you can simply pick up something that can bring you money. The bandits were worried, talking to each other, saying that 50 years, it can't be. It's funny, because it's the same as if he sent them to their deaths. A piece of paper landed on the face of the indignant head, and he whined that this was a slave contract. The man held the golden paper in his hands and watched in surprise as Yoo-jin confidently threw many white sheets onto his head. Taking one sheet, he asked what it was, and the guy replied that he found them in a box. Throwing the sheet out of his hand, the guy continued that these were contracts of the F ranks. They had kidnapped more than 30 people. The head looked anxiously at the hero, who asked how many of them remained uninjured, and hastened to justify himself that it didn't matter. They all agreed to it voluntarily, and it was not their fault. Even if you find out, more than half are already dead. Yoo-jin, holding the papers in his hand, suddenly kicked the gang leader in the head. The man held his cheek, and the guy called him an insulting word. Crumpling the sheet in his hand, he looked down at it and asked, "Does he think that if they are F rank, then he doesn't care even if they die?" The guy continued that if you push them with promises to take them to the dungeon, many will agree, and then it's enough to push them there like some kind of sea. Yoo-jin looked at the bandit carefully. Myung-woo called him admiringly standing next to Seong Han, when he heard the guy say that no matter what level they are also people, and gang members are killers. There were many sheets of old contracts on the floor. The brunette told them to crawl, as they had been crawling until now. Then they would understand what they had done. Yujin turned away, saying that he really wanted to throw them straight into a high-level dungeon. The fat bandit sitting behind him called out to him, worried. He said that he was to blame, they were all to blame, they would think it over. So at least this time, let him take pity on them, okay? Yujin calmly listened to the bandit's pleas that a 50-year contract was already too much, let him come to terms with it. The guy smiled charmingly and said that it was good. Patting the bandit on the head, he said that it was good that they wanted to think things over. He squeezed the man's head with his fingers and, leaning towards him, said that he needed to pay the appropriate price for his crimes. The hero said to take them away from here. A car was driving through the evening city, and from there came words that the criminals had been taken to the Hunters Association. Seong Han, while driving, reported into a wireless headset about what was handed over to the employee. The victims were paid compensation and would later provide a report in the back seat. A tired Yujin slumped over Myung-woo's shoulder, saying that it had been a crazy day. In the car, words of gratitude were heard to the guy who asked why. Yujin smiled and shook his head, saying that it was nothing, and the long-haired one said that he couldn't help but worrying. The brunette looked at the guy and thought that later, with the awakening of his skill, he would receive good benefits. Myung-woo clutched the backpack that was on his lap and said that the guy had already saved him twice. The long-haired man cried, and the surprised hero asked why he was crying again and asked him to calm down, to which his friend said that, if it weren't for him, what would have happened to him now? Yujin was not allowed to say that this was nothing, because Myung-woo threw himself on his neck, hugging him, crying, and saying that he really was his hero. The car was driving along the road, and shouts could be heard from it about the guy not being stupid, but rather thanking Seong Han and the calm voice of the driver, who told them both to buckle up. A glass multi-story building towered over the night city. The hero remembered that immediately after returning, he went to Simeon. After he told him the whole story, he as Yaram's guardian was able to get a room for himself in the dorm. Simon watched in shock as Yujin lay on the floor by his door, preventing him from leaving. Then the following happened. The room shone with cleanliness and newness, had a wide bed and other furniture. An admiring question was heard, is this really a dorm room? Myung-woo looked around the room, saying that it looked like a luxury apartment, and Yujin, who was holding a booklet, said that they write that there are 4 rooms. Myung-woo was looking around the area with armchairs and a coffee table, saying that you could live in a place like this while studying, and the guy called out to him. Looking at the long-haired man, Yujin asked him if he knew how to do housework, to which he received the answer that the guy knew how to cook ramen. Myung-woo listened in surprise to the guy's words that outsiders are not allowed into this dormitory, but housekeeping workers are allowed to stay in it. How about pretending to be a worker after training to stay here? Yujin waved his hands, telling the surprised guy that this didn't mean he would have to actually do housework. The guy's admiring eyes, shining with tears, did not allow him to finish the sentence that it would be a long time before he settled here. Myung-woo threw himself on his neck, shouting that the guy was such a kind and good friend, to which the brunette exclaimed that he was crying again and asked to let him go. The long-haired man slept with his palms on the pillow. Yujin looked into the guy's room and thought that he quickly fell asleep. He was probably exhausted. Myung-woo muttered in his sleep for the guy to trust him with all the housework. Bath first or dinner? Yujin thought confusedly. What kind of sleep talk is this? He closed his eyes, contentedly saying that he needed to move things from Yuyun's room, who would be unhappy if he found out that he was moving. Turning to the exit, the guy bumped into Seong Han standing in the aisle and screamed in fear. He shouted indignantly, asking if Yu Hyan sent him, again ordered him to be locked up, to which he received a negative answer. Seong Han pointed a finger behind him, saying that this time he was on a different matter. Yujin looked at the man in surprise, who said that the matter was not easy and asked to follow him. The waiter, tired from his work, carefully carried a tray of drinks, while many groups in the bar were animatedly communicating with each other. A young man, holding a mug of beer in his hand and a tray in the other, greeted visitors with a smile on his face. Having seen the new ones, he wanted to find out how many there were. But Seong Han walked into the bar wearing a dark shirt, with Yujin awkwardly standing behind him. The waiter hiccuped so much in fear that sweat began to flow all over his body. The man raised his glasses with one hand and asked him if he knew Kim Min-woo. The guy's face turned blue from the sight of him, after which he bent over and pointed to the side. He said that he received a call about him and then offered to take Seong-han and Eugene to a quieter place. Eugene became confused when the bar patrons began whispering to each other as they walked past them, and one young man with earrings sitting next to her assumed that they had come for money. The table is bursting with the number of appetizers for drinks, French fries, Caesar salad, and soup with sausages. The waiter said he served them the most popular item on the menu. The guys felt embarrassed by what was happening, but the young man bowed before them again, asking them to call him if they needed anything. Eugene looked around and wondered why he was brought here. Because this place looks like a youth place, Seong-han said this is the place recommended by a hunter from the abyss, who is about the same age as him. He said Minui suggested the place because it was popular among his peers. There's a neon sign on the wall of the bar that says Oppa is especially attractive when he's drinking, and there's music playing throughout the place. Eugene remembered that he is now a little over 20. While the song was playing in the bar, Seong-han held his hands to his face and advised the guy to relax and enjoy the atmosphere. And although he was still tense from what was happening, Eugene agreed with him. The guy started opening a bottle of soju. With a smile on his face, he asked Seong-han why they came here. At that moment, the man took the drink from him because he wanted to pour it himself. While the man was holding the soju with both hands, Eugene felt awkward and didn't understand what was happening. Seong-han said that he wanted to apologize to him before it was too late. The guy made a face at what he heard so that all his muscles tensed when the man told him that he had not liked him all this time, since he seemed to him a stupid obstacle interfering with the future of the head of the guild. Eugene was in a stupor because after the apology, he received insults in his. The man blossomed as he admitted to the guy that he actually turned out to be a good person. Eugene no longer understands what Seong-han is talking about. He began to remember the moment when they were squatting together. He noted that the guy returned to help him as soon as the dungeon broke through. I also remember the moment Yaram awakened when she used her skill. He noted that at that moment the guy also entered into a contract with her, and he added that in the midst of all this, he not only resolved a problem with a guardian that could have become a source of trouble. He remembered how today Eugene sat between his friend and the bandit. The man noted that he went to save him, risking his safety. The guy was embarrassed by such confessions. Looking at him, Seong-han said that he could now trust him and also trust him to cover the rear. Eugene became so thoughtful that his eyes widened. He realized that this was a chance that he needed to take advantage of and use a code word to strengthen relationships. He imagined how he would say this word to him when they got drunk. Eugene clinked glasses with him, filled with soju. He began to smile. He thanked his friend for his good opinion of him. The guy decided to make him his pupil tonight. The man looked at him and noted that Eugene had handled today's incident incredibly skillfully. Then he asked if he had some kind of secret plan regarding the awakening brokers a few days earlier. The guy, holding his chin with his fingers, remembered how the guards dragged him up the stairs by the shoulder. He told Seong-han that he was investigating something back then. As Eugene tucked into a mouth-watering chicken salad, he added that it was a risky endeavor for the F-class. He said that he went there assuming that Yu-Hyan wouldn't just leave it like that. The guy scratched his head in embarrassment. He also said that he grabbed him before there was even a single assumption because Yu-Hyan is very worried about him. Seong-han replied that this is so because he is his only relative. Things could be worse. After which the man brought the glass to himself and said that he understood him perfectly since he himself was in a similar position. The guy left his salad aside and turned his attention to the man sitting opposite him. Seong-han admitted that he was raised by his grandparents as he also grew up without parents. The man remembered the moment he woke up during a dungeon strike when he was protecting his family. He said that after he grew up, he came to them every vacation to look at their well-being. He imagined an image of Yu-Hyan in his head, saying that the head helped him until they died last year. He added that the guy even hired a foreign healer specializing in caring for the sick. The man remembered the brunette with a smile on his face, since he knows so well the value of family ties. Eugene again held out his glass for his interlocutor to pour for him. The man told him to treat his brother with understanding, even if his concern seemed excessive. To which the guy said that he would do so, adding that he himself becomes calmer now that he sees that his youngest right hand is a person who understands him perfectly. Seong-han smiled at the compliment in his direction and continued drinking together. The guy said that in future, he would ask him to take care of him too. The bar is illuminated with a disco ball. Eugene raised his head in surprise and looked at Seong-han when he noticed that he was resistant to alcohol, although you couldn't tell from his appearance. Holding his glass in his hand, he admitted that he could only drink so much because he had an embarrassing habit that manifested itself when he was drunk, while the interlocutor did not suspect anything. The guy decided to prepare the ground for now and use a code word, pretending that the alcohol There was already a huge pile of empty bottles on the table. Shang-han noticed this and said that the guy had drunk too much. Meanwhile, the young man widened his eyes when he saw such a quantity, since he did not realize that he had drunk so much due to so much alcohol. He decided to pretend to be drunk, and his mouth began to drool, and his eyes looked in all directions. In fact, Yujin doesn't understand why he still does. The guy assumed that this was all due to the poison resistance skill. It is depicted as a red shield with a skull on it. Yujin realized that now he would not be able to get drunk, no matter how much he drank. Seong-hin looked at the young man, who, with a puzzled face, grabbed his head and squeezed his entire face. He doesn't want to say something like that sober, the man explained what suddenly came over him. Yujin raised his head and smiled. Still holding the glass in his hand, he said he was thinking about something at that moment. He tried to press the shield to turn off the skill, but at first it didn't work. Yujin began to think hard about making this skill disappear. After this, the tablet began to fall into pieces. Noticing that she was disappearing, the guy threw the glass so that all the sayu poured out of it. Seong-hin even began to sweat from what he saw. He called the guy by name. When Yujin turned red and his pupils constricted, the man asked if he was okay. The young man does not understand what is happening, as he suddenly became completely intoxicated from the amount of alcohol he drank. He muttered that he was crazy. The man stood up and looked at him warily when he added that everything had gone to his head at once. The guy hit his head on the table, where there were still a bunch of snacks. Seong-han tried to wake him up with his voice, calling his name, but it was no use. Sunlight streams through the open blinds. Yujin opened his eyes, with huge bruises around them. Dressed in blue pajamas, he stood up and grabbed his head, shouting that his head hurt. When Seong-hin approached him with a basin in his hands, walking on the bed with a dissatisfied face, the guy said that he thought the skill would just go away. The man said that he had brought water for washing. The guy was embarrassed. A man with a kind face and a soft smile stood in front of him. Yujin jumped out of bed. Grabbing the blanket, the man said that he needed to get ready if he wanted to start training from today. The guy didn't expect to see him in the morning. A system tablet appeared in front of him with a list of objects under care, including Seong-han. Yujin was still able to carry out his plan, but he still doesn't understand why he's been here since this morning. The young man looked at the morning guests with frightened eyes when he put the basin down and asked if he really didn't remember what happened last night. Yujin was shocked when Seong-hin brought his hand to his face. He hung with his hand in the air, smiling a good-natured smile, and said that he saw that he had a bad hangover. He was embarrassed because they wanted to shove a straw with a juice bag into his mouth. The guy said he didn't want something like that, but then he tried it and liked it. Seong-han looked at it and said that it was poraria juice that helps with hangovers. The man threw him onto the bed and grabbed his leg, or rather the point that needs to be pressed so that the hangover goes away quickly. Seong-han handed him a golden casket, which made Yujin embarrassed and blocked it with his hand because he didn't understand what was happening at all. The man offered to use it if necessary, if it gets too bad, but the guy indignantly asked why he was behaving this way. The man was puzzled. He realized that the young man really didn't remember anything. That's why I decided to tell you what happened last night. They were in a bar, and Yujin got so drunk that he hit the table and fell asleep next to the snacks. Seeing this, Seong-hin fussed and asked him if everything was okay. The guy was in such a state that he was all red and spoke slurred words. The man in the shirt suggested that he had had too much and then offered to stand up. At that moment, Yujin suddenly grabbed his hand. Seong-hin looked at him blankly as he bowed his head. He called him by name. The guy decided to tell him something, so he asked him to listen to him carefully. Looking closely into his eyes, he confidently told him that he loved him. The man was shocked by what he heard, so he raised his eyebrows. At that moment, Yujin grabbed his head, and the man asked him what this meant. The guy said that he himself did not understand how he confessed his love to him in such a state. He became embarrassed and blushed even more. The guy suddenly stood up from his seat. He believes that he has gone crazy, but despite this, he still said again that he loves this man. After hearing what happened last night, Yujin bowed down in shame, to which the man raised his hands up and tried to calm him down, saying that everything was fine. Seong-hin said that he ended up declaring his love about 30 times. The guy began to apologize to them for committing a mortal sin. The man admitted, with a smile on his face, that he liked it. Yujin repeated what he had heard. Seong-hin thinks, this is quite strange. But then he remembered something. He tried to help the guy get up, but he still insisted that he loved him. The man looked at him with a smile and asked if this was the embarrassing drinking habit he had been warned about, but Yujin was unable to answer, so he only muttered an incomprehensible word. Embarrassed by his behavior, he asked him not to laugh. As he asked him to listen, the guy said again that he loves Mr. Seong-hin. It brought a smile to his face. That moment reminded him of memories from the past, when he supported a drunken older man by the shoulder to help him stay on his feet, and he said that he loved him. His grandfather pressed him close to him, so that his grandson had to bend over. Seong-hin asked him why he needed to drink so much. The man replied that he could afford to have a glass today. Since he has a reliable family member, then he has nothing to worry about. Seong-han shouted, "Oh my god." The cheerful grandfather in the hat told him to never get hung up on what some strangers said about his parents abandoning him. He grabbed Nuk by the hair with his hand. Even though he was already much taller than him, the man called him the best and said that he loved him. Seong-han, looking at him, exhaled as he again began to be rowdy due to drunkenness. They walked down the path together, hugging each other, talking to each other. Grandfather again said that he loved him, and the man only hurried him to go faster. What happened last night was very reminiscent of this moment from his past life. Seong-han said that for some reason, looking at Yujin, he remembered his deceased grandfather. A system tablet appeared, on which it was written that the awakened Seong-han had received beneficial influence from the code word. The guy, who was still wearing pajamas, was embarrassed by what he heard. He asked him again. Sitting on his knees, the young man asked if he really resembled his grandfather. The man gave a positive answer, not understanding what was happening. Yujin grabbed his face with his hands and thought that he looked so old. Since he reminded him of his grandfather, he recalled that he was only a little over 20 at that moment. Seong-hin began to shake his head around and said that he also thought it was strange, since he was not a grandfather at all. He remembered how he covered the guy with a blanket, and Youngwoo watched it all from the aisle. The man said that he had not felt such peace for a long time, because it was as if he was next to his grandfather. There was still a bowl of water, a juice box, and a golden casket on the bed. Seong-han realized that he was constantly trying to serve something to Yujin. Since he reminded him of his grandfather, he promised that he would not talk nonsense in the presence of others. The man asked if he could occasionally inquire about the boy's well-being and visit him. Seong-hin gave him his hand and said that he so wanted to make up for all the remaining regrets to the man who raised him. A bead of sweat ran down Yujin's face. He repeated his last words. It dawned on him that this was all a teacher, or rather the effect of an ideal teacher who protects. He repeated his last words. It dawned on him that this was all a teacher, or rather the effect of an ideal teacher who protects a child with his own hands. Yujin sits thoughtfully on the bed. Looking at the floor, he realized that words about love awakened memories not of a friend or lover, but of the person who raised him. He thought that the result was a projection of this teacher, so he reminded Seong-hin of his grandfather. He remembered the behavior of Yaram, Myungwoo, and his brother. The guy realized that they see him as their teacher. Like a duckling, he thought that he was originally a mentor for Yu Yeon, so his reactions became more impulsive, and in that case. At this moment, his thoughts were interrupted by Seong-hin opening the door, and the guy became embarrassed and raised his hands, smiling, holding his hand to his face. He noticed that a trembling Myungwoo had been watching them all this time. He grabbed his shoulders so that Yujin was dragging him. The long-haired guy said that he was scared because Mr. Seong-han was suddenly at home. Yaram appeared in front of them and broke down the door with a smile on her face. She said that she heard that her uncle had moved into the dorm, and even into the room next to hers. When Yujin saw the broken door with a hole, he held a toothbrush in his mouth and was embarrassed by what was happening. He asked to at least knock first. Yaram abruptly grabbed Myungwoo by the collar, which was hanging on her uncle the whole time. She asked why he stuck to him, to which he simply chuckled and called Yujin. The teacher told her that this was his friend. He thought that he believed that it was a brainwashing skill, not any education, that was capable of making even S classes no doubt follow him. Yujin thinks it's too dangerous. The brunette thought about why the system gave him such a skill. With fear, he pressed the button, thanks to which he was able to turn on the poison resistance again. A few days later, the table was set, which was filled with a variety of delicious dishes. Seeing this, Yujin said that Myungwoo had become very good at cooking. While his friends looked at the goodies, Myungwoo smiled. The teacher was embarrassed and said that he didn't have to cook like that every day. Myungwoo replied that he couldn't do that, since he doesn't even pay rent, which is why he considers himself a freeloader. Yaram, before starting to eat, asked. She started making an omelet, saying that Myungwoo should at least cook if he wanted to repay the debt, adding that even she lives separately. Hearing her words, Yujin asked to stop. The kitchen is already clean to a shine, despite the fact that Myungwoo prepared so much food while they were eating. One of them said that today Mr. Seong-han had not come yet, but yesterday he brought red ginseng. The guy said that the man went to clear the dungeon with Yu Hyan, so he will be gone. Yujin, wearing a gray sweatshirt and holding a spoon, looked at a pleased Yaram. He told her that after some time she, too, would go to the dungeon and immediately get on television. Yaram said that she would go and smash everyone, after which she would collect magic stones, thanks to which she will. A strange aura began to appear around her, and the girl smiled devilishly, which confused those around her. She added that she would then buy a huge house, so they could live with her, and not just with their uncle, to which Yujin replied that she would freeze the snacks if she talked so much. Yujin felt embarrassed by what was happening. He asked not to be like that, as they would have to get along in the future. Yaram and Myungwoo jumped up and started pointing fingers at each other when the teacher told them that they would be going through rookie hunter training together. Myungwoo asked, "Really, with this girl? Did Yaram check with this guy?" The teacher ran away when they started fighting among themselves because the girl was very angry, which scared Myungwoo. She exclaimed that she thought that during the training she would only be with a mentor. Out of breath, the guy opened the door for the man, asking his friends to stop. A man in a suit called him cheerful since the morning. It turned out to be Simeon, with his assistant standing behind him, and he handed the piece of paper to Yujin and said that the training starts from today. While the three looked at him with surprised faces, the man with glasses announced that the schedule had changed, so he came to visit them in person. Simeon also said that the person in charge of the theory is a little late. They suddenly changed into orange overalls and found themselves in an unknown place, holding spears in their hands. This happened because the man with glasses decided to start training with basic practice. In front of them was a cage in which there were angry monsters covered with close fur, but despite this, Simayong told them not to worry, since the essence of the practice is extremely simple. The monster, trying to get out of captivity, makes various growling sounds, showing sharp fangs. The cage disappeared. A swarm of monsters filled the entire room, and the guy shook with fear. Simeon said that they just need to destroy the monsters in front of them. He asked them, "Is it easy?" A crowd of monsters roared towards the heroes. Yujin exclaimed, asking where such a thing had been seen. The guy looked scared and was holding a spear in his hands. Myungwoo was holding on to him in fear, and Yaram was standing behind them. The guy shouted that this was basic training, after which he asked if they didn't usually get rid of one monster at a time, to which the girl asked if it was necessa. Simayong brought the walkie-talkie closer and, laughing, said that this was practice for getting used to monsters. Hordes of rodents were heading towards the heroes. The man added on the radio that the more contact there is with them, the faster they will get used to them, to which Yujin exclaimed in fear about where such a thing had even been seen. The girl moved towards the monsters, telling them not to worry because she would cut them up in no time. She made a strong push with a wide smile. One by one she struck with her spear. At the battle site, a bright light appeared and dust rose. The guys covered their faces, and Yujin said that it looked inspiring. Yaram admiringly held a spear on which two rodents were hanging and asked if it would be tasty if they were grilled. The guy asked her to lower them, joking that she had an occupational deformity. Simeon watched Yaram through the screen. She told the guy with a smile that the skills also need to be tried. A girl in a dress approached him from behind, calling Yaram a true S-class, adding that although she was a beginner, her power was especially impressive. The man looked at her with a smile. He was glad that she came. He adjusted his glasses, and the woman standing behind him said that this was basic practice, after which she asked if it was dangerous for them to fight with so many, to which he replied that she should not worry about it. He looked at the screen where the girl dumped monster corpses up a mountain, covered them in ice, and called it a Christmas tree, and said that he was more afraid that there wouldn't be enough monsters for these guys. The carcasses of rodents lay under a shiny crust of ice. Another living monster crawled out from under them. The heroes noticed it. Suddenly he rushed towards Myungwoo, which scared him very much. Yujin turned to look at him in surprise, shouting his name. The guy, looking at the approaching monster, squealed a little. Yujin shouted to him to put out his spear and cut as it was. The guy threw the spear to the floor. He quickly turned around and began to ask for help. Running away from the rodent, hairs appeared in his eyes, and he shouted in a trembling voice that this would not work. A monster loomed over him. Myung-woo exclaimed in despair that he was catching up with him. Suddenly, Yujin jumped and pulled the guy out from under the monster's blow, and dust rose into the air. The guy looked in surprise at Yujin, who knelt down, holding a spear in his hand, and asked how he could even throw the weapon. Looking at the angry rodent, and said that it is an F-class monster, a toothy mole, and that it has poor eyesight, so it basically only moves in a straight line. The guy stood up, covering Myung-woo with himself, and sternly said that even if he just waved his spear, he would cut it without any problems. Simeon leaned on the table, watching the monster move towards the guys, and called Yujin by name. He said with a calm expression that he wanted to see what the guy would do. He continued to look at Yujin's face and added that the guy was trying very hard. The rodent approached the heroes at high speed. The man said that Yujin, of course, knows about monsters, and the contract signed with Yaram can be considered a standard for their sphere, but he may well be hiding something. Myung-woo looked confusedly at Yujin standing in front of him and asked if everything would be okay with him, to which the guy replied not to worry, because such a thing was even nonsense even for him. Myung-woo smiled and said that he is incredible because he is not even afraid, after which he added that, unlike him, he is just like an experienced hunter who has been in the business for several years. These words plunged the guy into a stupor. He asked himself, if he easily kills the monster, will it seem suspicious? The enraged monster rushed at him, baring his teeth. The guy threw the spear out of his hands, deciding that he would behave like a beginner, and that at the same time there would be less damage to Myung-woo's self-confidence. The mole attacked the guy, who squealed in horror that he was very scared. Myung-woo looked at him in fear. The man looked at what was happening through the glass and said that on the other hand, his eyes could deceive him. The metal doors slowly moved apart. Yaram asked if it was all over yet. They left the training area. Yujin was carrying Myung-woo. The girl was stretching her arms, saying that everything went well, but she would like to practice more. The guy, holding on to the hero, tearfully asked for forgiveness for being bitten, but he still had to support him, to which Yujin replied that he really did not have any predisposition for battles. Yaram turned to them and happily boasted that she was indeed better. The guy put his hands on his hips and told her to stop comparing. He wanted to say that they should get along, but he was interrupted by Simeon, who praised them. The man adjusted his glasses and said with a satisfied look that they had successfully completed the basic practice. He added that Yaram is incomparably amazing, but he has nothing to say about the guys, to which Yujin annoyedly said that he would tell everything to his brother. A woman from the examination room approached them, and the man, looking at her, said that, as had been decided, theoretical training would take place tomorrow, after which he introduced her and said that she would be responsible for the progress of the classes. Hyun, holding a folder in her hand, adjusted her glasses, and said with a smile that she hoped they would get along. Yaram and Yujin looked at her in surprise. The girl admired the fact that she was so young and had already become a professor, and the guy exclaimed that he knew her. An image appeared in his head where Hyun stood in front of the pulpit and presented something to the public. The guy remembered that she was an authority in the scientific circles of dungeon studies, the young genius who, after her trip to the USA, discovered a pattern in the appearance of dungeons. He finished the thought out loud, which made the girl happy. He called her Dr. White. The girl approached him, saying that few people call her that, causing Yujin to shy away and say that he was pretty much interested in this area. He realized that she was not that famous yet. Yeon looked him in the face and said, with a smile, that he was indeed erudite. Yujin listened in embarrassment as she said that she had heard about him from her uncle, after which she corrected herself, calling her uncle the head of the personnel department. These words made the guy think. Suddenly, Yujin, looking at Hyun and Simeon, who had adjusted his glasses, exclaimed, asking what uncle meant, after which he realized that they had the same surname. The man asked him to avoid misunderstandings because she did not work because he took advantage of his position. Hyun smiled broadly and said that for some time she would be working in the abyss in connection with one study, so they would see each other part, after which she asked to take care of her. The guy embarrassedly shook her hand and muttered that it was he who was asking, thinking that judging by the course of events, he was now in the prime of his youth. The skyscraper was illuminated by the sun's rays. The high rocks were shrouded in smoke, and something was burning underneath them. Seong-han and Yoo-hyun walked across the scorched earth towards the dead flame lion. Yoo-hyun asked if the guy destroyed it. Seong-han replied that he thought so, since no reactions were visible. The dead beast lay with its mouth open. The head said that he was a monster, and that he really died. The man said that they only won because the head had resistance to fire. Yu Haiyan sat down next to the animal. The man standing behind him asked what they would do. Moving the carcass, they saw a small lion cub. Shining gates appeared in the darkness. Haiyan said that when a dungeon first appeared in the world, the portal was floating next to the roof of the building. People in uniform stood in front of it. The girl continued to say that everything was like primitive people who first discovered fire. Another gate was floating over the road along which people were crossing, and the girl finished the thought by saying that the people, half out of caution and half out of their interest, focused their attention on them. Bird-like monsters burst out of the scarlet gates. The girl said that the dungeons, which were left unattended, gradually overflowed and burst, as a result of which monsters poured out. Monsters flew over the city. Haiyan called it a dungeon breakout, adding that the dungeon shock occurred due to a simultaneous dungeon breakout. The girl in the red uniform held back the bird's mouth with all her might. The professor said that even in such a crisis, many people from among the awakened entered into battle. People in sealed suits monitored the crystals in the capsules. Haiyan added that others began to invent new technologies using magic stones as a new source of energy, and that humanity was quickly adapting to the measured world. Above the building was a golden symbol of the association. The professor said that in each country an association of hunters was founded to control the awakened ones, and that most hunters conduct their activities by being in an association or being part of a guild. There were several hunters standing near this building. The girl added that S-class hunters in the country conduct activities that are mainly related to business or go the way of founding large guilds. Yujin listened with interest to the girl's lecture. The girl stood near the pulpit in front of the heroes, saying that she would then tell about the Awakened One's fusion. Was thinking about that, and when he listens about it now, it gives him new thoughts. The professor pointed her hand at the screen, saying that the level of an Awakened One is determined by looking at stats and skills in general. The guy looked down at the table and thought that she was giving a good lecture, and her explanation was easy to understand. The images changed on the screen, and the girl was still saying that since skills are abilities that are characteristic of each person, in a crisis situation, they manifest themselves in various forms for self-defense. The guy, looking at this, continued to think that due to the fact that the materials. A slide appeared on the screen with a girl sitting on a bed in a cluttered room with her legs crossed. It said that because she lived in an environmentally friendly environment filled with mold and moss. On the second slide, the girl put her hands forward. Next to her a plant grew to the ceiling, and the inscription said that thanks to this she received the ability of a wooden vine. Looking at this, the guy thought that the skills simply differ in inclinations and environment. The girl with the tablet leaned towards him and asked if she had made a mistake somewhere. The guy recoiled in fear from the table, and Haiyan said that he looked like a professor in her specialty, after which she said that he looked that way because there was a mistake, and asked where she was. Yaram stopped drawing and looked at them, thinking that she was almost noticed. Yujin awkwardly scratched the back of his head and said that this was just his guess. Yaram and Haiyan looked at the guy while he raised his hands and said that according to the professor, skills appear only at a critical moment for self-defense. However, recently the number of awakened ones whose skills are not related to battles has been growing, and, in his opinion, it has nothing to. The girl put her hand to her lips and listened with interest to the guy while he said that before it looked like this because the situation was in crisis every day due to constant dungeon breakthroughs, but in reality there may be other factors in the manifestation of skills. He looked into the professor's eyes and sheepishly said that she could simply ignore him, thinking that nothing should happen from this piece of information. Suddenly the girl grabbed the guy's hand. She approached Yujin with delight and admired the fact that he even understood the tendency of skill displays. Sweat appeared on the guy's face, and he listened in embarrassment as she said that he really deserved his uncle's attention, after which she asked if he was conducting some kind of personal research and if he wouldn't mind talking a little after the lecture, about 10 hours in total. Suddenly he extended his hand and loudly asked Yaram if she had any questions for the professor. The girl made a circle with her fingers, timidly asking how much S ranks earned. The professor grinned and said that this was an important question. She took out a bill gun. She filled the room with golden bills and, holding her hand up, said that the base salary for such heroes is $10 million. To which the girl reacted with delight. The guy asked himself if the professor brought this thing specifically for this purpose. He looked with relief as the girl issued a large number of banknotes and said that it was only natural that the salary was so outstanding because in all countries S-rank hunters were so rare that they could be counted on one hand. An image of a map with marks in the form of people appeared in my imagination, and the professor said that in addition to the fact that they fight monsters in creepy high-level dungeons and protect the safety of citizens, the image was replaced by jewelry and flowers floating in the air. The girl added that the objects obtained by them in dungeons have simply astronomical value, be it magic stones or rare animals and tree fruits. Then an image appeared with a screaming fiery lion, and the professor said that sometimes there are living magical beasts. The guy stood behind his brother and asked if he had found it in the dungeon, to which Yuyun said that it was, saying that it was a fiery horned lion cub and that he thought he could tame it and use it as a mount. Yujin listened to him in surprise. He remembered what the lion cub looked like, one horn on its head, scarlet fur, and a fox-like tail. He imagined how a huge lion cut the air with its claws, setting everything on fire. The guy remembered that this is a subspecies of unicorns. A second-class fiery horned lion has high stats and high speed. An image appeared in my imagination of how this lion loomed over the hunters, and the guy added that this was a dangerous magical beast that even S-rank hunters would find difficult to compete with alone. The guy stood in front of the cabinet on which there was a baby. Yujin added that in front of them was his cub, and Yuyun said that he had no signs of taming. He took some kind of blue necklace in his hand. Yujin asked with interest whether there were any hunters who specialized in taming, to which his brother replied that there were, but he had already tried all the basic techniques and even got the owner's sign, but said that this was not will help. This blue stone in the guy's hand was the sign of the owner, which allowed him to recognize the owner as the owner. The guy pulled it out in front of him and imperiously told the lion cub to come down to him. The kid looked at him in shock, after which he staggered standing on the cabinet. Yujin said that it seemed to him that there was an effect. The baby bared his claws. Suddenly he jumped with a scream on the face of Yuyun, who shouted to his brother to be careful. He pushed away the frightened Yujin. The guy extended his hand, shrouded in a dark aura. He released a strong stream of energy from his hand. Yujin asked him not to burn the baby. The room filled with purple flames. The lion cub, shrouded in fire, still screamed. The guy remembered that fiery attacks do not affect a fiery lion. The baby, reaching the guy, scratched his face. Yujin looked at it in shock. A guy screamed in the house, shouting his brother's name. Yu Hyan stood covered in bruises and held the disgruntled baby by the withers. He threw him behind the glass door and said that he needed to be locked in the garden. Yujin watched as the kitten landed on a tree branch and said that such a little thing has a lot of ferocity. He laid his hands on the glass and asked his brother if everything would be okay, because he behaves this way even with the presence of a sign from the owner. Yu Hyan inspected his clothes that had been scratched by the lion cub and said that he didn't have high hopes anyway and offered to get rid of it, to which Yujin asked if he wanted to put it up for auction. The words of the guy were heard in the room, saying that he wants to kill him because if someone gets him, there may be problems, to which the brother exclaimed in shock. He looked upset at the kitten behind the glass, thinking that nothing could be done anyway, but it was still a pity, because if he could be tamed, he would be ideal for Yu Hyan. He looked at the kitten, around which information appeared that he was currently C rank and had the ability to resist class of fire. But after growing up he could become Ors rank and gain fire breathing, fire running, and gigantization. Looking at him, he thought that even after 5 years, there was no pay. Suddenly, the guy's attention was attracted by a notification that appeared, stating that the object was in a state of incomplete application of the effect of the code word. Yuyun looked blankly at his brother, frozen in a stupor, who was asking himself if he could use the training skill on monsters. An image appeared in his mind of Yuyun, sitting on an adult lion, galloping with a sword in his hands, and he thought what it would be like if he succeeded. Keeping her eyes on the kitten, she asked if the other guilds had mounts, to which the brother replied that they did, but they were all low level, and no one had a high-level monster like this. Yujin smiled contentedly. He turned to his brother and asked if he could try to race him, thinking that it could be huge, and if he succeeded, the baby could become the only high-level riding monster in the world. The guy began to think about magical beasts. A painted fiery lion stood in front of a man with a sword and shield. The guy thought that monsters that existed only in legends became reality after the appearance of dungeons. Huge snakes were pierced with spears. He added that most of them should be destroyed. The knight was sitting on a blue unicorn, holding a spear, and the guy finished his thought by saying that, however, there were cases when they could be tamed. Warriors on unicorns galloped after the fiery lion. Yujin told his brother that monsters were especially rare as mounts. People on griffins flew down. The guy added that they are especially needed in high-ranking dungeons because of their size, and the presence of a mount makes staying there much more favorable. The guy looked at his brother with enthusiasm, holding his hand in front of him, and said that, among other things, the lion cub has resistance to fire, so it's a pity to just refuse. He pointed to his brother, who was looking at him in confusion, and added that a lion would be ideal as his mount. Yujin asked him to think about what would happen if he found another mount. After which Yuyan imagined how he was sitting on a chicken that was fried after using the technique, and said that his brother was right. In the fantasy, Yuyan was sitting on a lion, and the guy was lying on a lot of money. Yujin continued to say that the lion has resistance to fire, and it is an unprecedented high-level monster, and if you tame it, you can get a power that is impossible to imagine, and Yujin himself will get insane many benefits as payments for taming. Looking at the angry lion cub, Yuyan asked how he was going to tame it. The guy tilted his head with a smile. Suddenly he raised his hand with a ladle. He and his brother were wearing scarves and aprons, after which he said that they should start with food, because if you give him something tasty, you can earn extra points. There were broccoli and monster meat on the table. The guy also put a bowl for food and asked his brother what the baby was eating, to which Yuyan replied that he was eating monster meat, to which magic stones needed to be mixed, adding that 1 stone was needed for 1 meal C-class. Yujin was very surprised by what he heard since 1 such stone cost 10 billion won. They poured fragments of broken crystals onto a bowl of blue meat. This is the elite food of a magical beast. The kitten started eating. The guy looked devastated, thinking that if the baby eats only once a day, then a year will be 3,600,000, and if 3 times a day, then 10 billion won. Yuyan told him not to worry, and that he will pay for the food. The baby happily devoured the food in the bowl. Yujin thought that if you look at it like that, the kitten is quite cute. The guy's cheeks turned red as he wondered if the beast would understand the code words if he said that he loved him. In the guy's fantasy, he and the lion cub stood on the grass next to the bowl, and the guy wondered that if he generally understands the meaning of each word, take heart, then will there be an effect if he tells him every time during feeding that loves him. Yujin opened the glass door, deciding that he needed to first gain his interest. The animal looked at him irritably. The lion cub angrily jumped on the guy. Yujin waved his hand, deciding that getting closer through play after feeding would suit him. He swung the B-class belt, which the baby bit on. He recalled how he played with the dog and thought that while working part-time at a veterinary clinic, everyone was delighted with such a game of toffee. Suddenly the animal shook its head and the guy was spun around in the air, which made him scream to his brother. Yuyan ran into the garden in fear while the guy was getting up and asked if he was okay, to which his brother replied that everything was okay, but something else was more important now. He took the owner's sign in his hand. Yujin brought it to the face of the irritated beast and calmly said that he was its owner. Suddenly, the baby calmed down. The guy sat in delight in front of the baby till notifications appeared, saying that the title of the ideal teacher adds an effect to the owner's sign and that the animal is showing interest in the teacher. The lion cub fell on its side and began to play affectionately with the guy. Ryujin put his hand on his chest and mentally called him cutie, and Yu Yeon said in surprise that it was the first time he had seen a baby behave like that. He leaned down and extended his hand while the guy held the animal by its paws, saying that he would hug it, and his brother told him to be careful because he was still a monster. Suddenly the animal bit Yu Yeon's hand, causing him to exclaim. Yujin took the baby in his arms while his brother grimly held his hand and told the little animal that this should not be done. Yuyan exhaled and scratched the back of his head, saying that it's fine as long as he doesn't act aggressively towards Yujin, and added that his brother should raise him well because even if he doesn't become a mount, he will protect Yujin. The guy held the baby in his arms and with a wide smile said that he would put all his effort into raising him. The kid rubbed his head against the guy while he thought that raising animals was better than brainwashing people. He imagined himself playing with several baby magical beasts and wondered if he could keep several of the beasts he had raised near him. Then he imagined how these kids jumped into his arms and he was very happy, thinking that in this case he would become something like a tamer of magical animals. He stood up with a smile, holding the animal in his arms, and said that he would take it, as they had agreed, after which his brother asked him if he would raise it outside of the garden. The guy headed to the door and said that the dorm room was also very spacious, to which Yuyan asked in surprise if he really would leave and live separately. Yujin turned around with a smile, thinking that if he stayed, his brother would ban him again, after which he replied that it would be better, and he also had Myungwoo and Yaram. Yu Yun looked down in disappointment. Yujin asked in surprise what was wrong with him, to which his brother replied that they had just made up and he couldn't even really see him, adding that he understood that the guy should have his own life, but still, he didn't raise glance at brother. Yujin listened in surprise as the guy said that he thought they could live together like before. He remembered the words of Seonghin, who said that the guy knows the value of family ties so well that even if his anxiety seems excessive, it should be treated with understanding. Hyojin put his hand on his brother's head, thinking that he was not to blame for anything. He patted his brother on the head and said that he was not moving around and that he would live here and there and would also come here often, after which he thought that in fact, his skill and the way the world had become were to blame. He happily patted his brother on the back and said with a smile that as soon as he finished training, they will relax together more often. Suddenly, it dawned on him and he asked Yu Yun if he was free tomorrow evening. The brother's answer rang through the kitchen, saying that he could free up some time, and then asked what it was for. The guy looked him in the face and offered to have a glass after tomorrow's practice, to which his brother asked in surprise if he wanted to drink. Yujin raised his hand and said that Yu Yun is already an adult and they haven't even drunk together yet. He imagined them sitting in a room with pizza on the table and thought that if there was peace all around, as before, then it would probably be normal for them to live together and drink in the evenings. Yu Yun happily lowered his gaze and said that he would wait. Yujin raised the animal and said that he still needed to come up with a name. His brother asked if he had any ideas. The guy lowered the baby lower and with a smile suggested calling him Peace, because there should be peace and love in the earthly world. Clouds floated across the sky while the guy reasoned that there was nothing wrong with this, because they were recently reunited brothers and they should often spend time with each other. Another gate appeared in the city. There was a crowd of people around it. A policeman was talking on the radio and a cameraman was filming what was happening. Yujin stood in a stupor. Yu Yun smiled warmly. Wu stood behind Yaram. The girl confusedly asked what was going on. Suddenly she pointed to the hero's brother and exclaimed, asking why the head of the guild should go with them, to which the guy replied with a smile that he was looking forward to today. He turned his gaze to Yujin and asked him to take care of him. The guy looked up with a devastated look, thinking that there was definitely something wrong with his younger brother. Yu Yun and Yaram stood in front of the dungeon. The girl looked unhappy, and the guy looked to the side. The operator said that he would take pictures of them, asking them to look at him. The reporter approached the guy and asked why he was personally assisting in the first clearing of the Yaram Hunter's dungeon. The girl looked nervously into the camera, and the guy calmly answered into the microphone that this was the first dungeon of the new S-class, and therefore he wanted to conduct it personally, and besides, it was his duty as the head of the guild and the most experienced S-class. Wu and Yujin were sitting on a bench behind them. The guy covered his face with his hand and asked if this is how peer works, after which Wu said that this story would become a touching example for others. Yujin had an image in his head of his brother, Yaram Wu and Seong Han using abilities, and he thought that this was an ideal alliance because they are two representatives of generally opposite elements, fire and ice. Plus, they have the creator of the equipment Wu, and then thought, will he get Seong Han's defensive ability? Yujin looked at the guy with a smile and said that he was looking forward to it. Various types of blades glittered on the stand. The surprise guy stood among a large amount of equipment. The man behind them said that all this was given out for free, but everything must be returned after returning. Wu and Yujin looked at the weapons. The hero said that due to the influence of the guild, there were indeed a lot of good things there. Suddenly Wu was frightened by a man who appeared next to him, who said that any damage would need to be repaired. The hero looked at his comrade and thought with displeasure that this was a man who would create things 10 times better. He handed the spear to the guy and told him not to be so afraid because high-level things are stronger than ordinary ones. They looked at the jars illuminated by the sun, and the guy said that they should grab some restorative potions, after which they asked if they were free. Yaram was collecting potions. The man replied to Yujin that since they were not in the guild, they needed to be paid. The guy didn't listen to him and shouted to the girl to grab potions for 4 and give them to them. The girl picked up a huge axe with eyes and asked her to choose a weapon, asking if Yujin liked it, to which the guy confusedly asked where she found this thing. Yu Yeon, standing in front of the reporters, looked at his brother, who explained to the girl that she focuses on skills, so she should take something to suit her physique. The journalist brought him a microphone and asked if he had any idea about the prospects for the further development of the guild. But the guy did not listen to him, thinking that his brother, as he thought, was surprisingly erudite for a novice hunter. He decided that this knowledge was accurate and he suddenly smiled warmly, ending the thought with his brother gathering as much information as possible about the hunters out of concern for him, and the reporter exclaimed that the head of Abyss smiled. The reporter quickly left, deciding that the prospects were really good. And the head and heroes gathered at the dungeon. Yuyan offered to move forward, to which his brother agreed, and Yaram quipped that they were inseparable. The dungeon gate was floating in the air. Yuyan said that on the other side was a relatively safety-ranked dungeon, a rocky area, and that the gate would close an hour after they entered, and would not open until either the boss or hunters. The guy took out the capsule and said that in a pinch, you can use the gate stone, but it is such a rare thing that you can't even find 2 of them in the country. The girl was amazed that he even had such a thing. Looking at his brother standing with a spear, he told them to try their best. He called out to Yujin, but he did not hear. Images of the past appeared in his thoughts, and he thought that just a couple of days ago he was treated like trash and humiliated in the dungeons. He looked at his group. Yaram was calling him, and thought that now everything is different. He is not at the bottom of the dead hole. He is not being persecuted. He adjusted his equipment, adding that he was going with his younger brother and people who were glad to see him. With a wide smile, he replied that he was already following them. He walked towards the group, deciding that that future no longer existed, and as if it had never existed. Entering the gate, he thought that he believed in it then. Myung-woo and Yaram looked around in surprise. The girl exclaimed in admiration. They stood on a small hill. Around them there were green fields and high rocks. The girl exclaimed that this was a dungeon. Yu Hyan drew his blade. Stepping forward a little, the girl looked around and said that this is the first time she sees such a landscape, as if it were another world, to which the guy replied that they did not come to have fun, and so that they should not succumb to the camp mood. The guy looked sternly at the sword, which was enveloped in dark flames. He struck the ground, and a wave of flames hit in front of him. The heroes looked at what was happening in shock. Yaram looked at the guy's face in a stupor. The next second, she walked to the edge of the cliff, looking at the burning fields, grabbed her head, and exclaimed that he was doing this. She turned to Yuyan and shouted at him in irritation, asking what he was trying to achieve by setting everything on fire for no reason. Yujin approached her from behind. She continued to shout, asking if he had heard anything about protecting the environment. After which she said that if he didn't like something, he could just say it, but she was interrupted by Yujin, saying that everything was completely wrong and for her to look down. She looked down and was surprised to notice that there were monsters hiding there. Yuyan, standing against the backdrop of a burning flame, sheathed his blade and said that the first thing after getting into the dungeon is to ensure safety, but from the outside, it is impossible to assess the situation and find out if there are monsters, and therefore the strongest hunter of the GR. He looked sternly at the heroes and asked if they were taught these basics in theoretical classes. The girl, standing behind Yujin, awkwardly scratched the back of her head and said that, of course, they were taught everything, adding that she simply did not have an area attack, because if she had, then the girl would have done everything. She was interrupted by Yujin and said that she is right. The head, standing with his back to them, exhaled heavily and listened as the girl asked whether skills could really appear. Yujin asked if she listened to the lectures. He looked at the dead monster and explained that the level increases after killing monsters, and every 10 levels a new skill appears. He opened the interface and added with a smile that this is exactly why they came to practice, but it was impossible to predict which skill would appear. He looked up at the girl, who was looking at him with interest, and thought that, fortunately, he himself could choose him. The notification window said that the guy could select a preferred skill for the Yaram object. He remembered the pale rain that Yaram used in his previous life, and thought that this was just a characteristic area attack skill for an ice, which a notification appeared in front of the girl looking at the guy, saying that the Yaram object was set to receive this skill. The girl listened with delight, as he said that he was sure that she would have an area attack, after which she happily said that if she raised 10 levels, she would be able to help Yujin. Yuyan languidly said that he did not need help. He turned to her and explained that the amount of experience for raising 1 level for an S class is 5 times higher than for an F class, and besides, for each subsequent level, more points are required, so even if they cleared the entire dungeon, they still won't get 10 levels. Suddenly he put out his hand, pointing at the girl, and said that he would help his brother and that she should take care of herself. Yujin stood behind the angry girl and asked his brother to be careful. Yaram said that he has been very cocky lately. The girl approached Yu Yian and, pointing her finger at him, began to quarrel with him. Yujin, standing behind them, tried to calm them down. The girl asked if he was annoyed because she was close to his brother, and then said that he was her guardian. The guy calmly told her that he wasn't bullying anyone, he was just trying to instill in her S-rank self-awareness. Yaram said irritably that she herself was aware of this. Yujin tried to calm them down, telling them to listen to him, but his brother interrupted him, telling the girl that she was talk. Yujin grabbed both of them by the cheeks in a rage. They still continued to argue. The girl asked why he even followed him here. Yuyan replied that it was not out of great pleasure that he kept his distance all this time. Unable to bear it, the guy shouted at them to stop, asking what they had done. They pointed at each other, trying to shift the blame from themselves, which made the guy even more angry. Myungwoo timidly stood aside and listened as the guy shouted at them that if they were going to fight because of him in front of him, then they should leave now. After which Myungwoo fearfully asked if they would leave. Yujin looked at his brother and asked why he came here with them, to which he replied that he came to help with the practice. Then the guy turned his gaze to the girl and asked her why she came to the dungeon. She awkwardly replied that she came to raise the level and hunt monsters. He then looked at them angrily, raising his hand, and told them to focus on killing monsters furiously, adding that the F classes also needed to kill a large number of monsters in order to increase their levels. Yaram and Yuyan listened silently as he told them to pretend they were getting along, just like in an interview, but if they kept fighting like that, he wouldn't even look at them. They looked at each other angrily and decided that there was nothing to do. The girl tensely extended her hand, asking if they would be friends from now on. Yu Hyan looked at her irritably and said that he would also speak informally, after which he asked her to take care of him. They quickly and angrily shook each other's hands with great force. The guy looked at this and said that now they should try to really get along with each other. A monster appeared not far from them, taking off while the guy said that they were in a dungeon and should not let their guard down, after which he asked to help him and Myungwoo raised 10 levels. Yaram and Yuyan quickly looked at the fleeing monster. They decisively took off, leaving behind an explosion, and continued to argue in the air about who exactly would bring the monster to Yujin. The hero and Myungwoo watched in shock as they created explosions after blows with enormous power. And the guy thought that an ideal alliance would only be when they learned to get along with each other. Then he wondered whether such a future would come. Voices were heard in the Shining Ice Palace. Naked said that someone had entered the dungeon, to which the second voice asked who exactly. Stairs rose next to the ice buildings, and the first person said that this was the one who turned back time. A girl with blue hair approached the chair and loudly asked if it was true, after which she asked to find where exactly he entered. The girl in the chair fussily asked her for some time. The blue-haired girl with a smile asked her to hurry up because they can only intervene when he's in the dungeon. She looked at the screen where Yujin was and said that they were waiting for his return, calling him dear. A huge stone arch stood next to a rock. Some animals were grazing under it. Something caught the monster's attention. He looked at the sky. Suddenly Yaram struck their herd, freezing the area. She looked at what had happened with a smile and, letting off steam from her mouth, said that it was easy. She turned to the flying monsters and said that she would freeze them and bring them to the guy. Suddenly a thread of energy knitted together while the girl was wondering whether a spear would pierce such an ice sheet. Yuyan snapped his fingers and the monsters burst into flames. He said that he would burn their fur so that the spear would penetrate better. One by one, the monsters fell into a heap in front of the guys. The rival said that they were still breathing, so it would be enough to just pierce them with a spear. Myungwoo looked at it in shock, while Yujin fussed behind him and said that they were incredible. He asked Yujin, who was holding a magic stone, what he was doing, to which the guy replied that it was necessary to collect stones from dead monsters and was horrified at how much it all cost, and the S ranks were freaking out. The guy, standing on the corpse of the monster, extended his hand to Myungwoo and said that he also needed to raise the level. Myungwoo looked down timidly, sticking his spear, and he asked the hero if he would have good skills if he diligently leveled up. Yujin looked at him as he opened the interface and said that he had nothing to worry about because this would happen. He looked at the information about the guy and thought that at level 10, he would unlock the SS class crafting skill, Master of the Gold Forge. Suddenly, he noticed that this skill had one more condition. In the skill window it said that to obtain it, you need to reach level 10, and it was written with an error that you also need to sharpen 10,000 blades. The guy looked at the inscription in surprise. He looked towards the joyful Mayan, who had raised another level, and thought that this had just happened. He continued to cut monsters in shock and asked himself whether there were errors in the system and whether it was really filled in by hand. Myung-woo wiped the sweat from his forehead and, looking at the interface, said that he had reached level 10, but not a single skill was given. The guy silently walked up to him and patted him on the back, asking himself who was filling the system. An amazing rocky landscape opened up before him, and he remembered that in the future, nothing was known about the system either. It changed the world. So many thought that it was a miracle given by God, after which he asked himself if it were God, would there be typos? Yaram hovered above Yuyun and said that she thought this was the last section. The guy below asked how Myung-woo and Yujin were doing and how many levels they had raised. The guy replied to his brother that Myung-woo had already raised 10 levels and he himself was almost finished. Suddenly his attention was attracted by a notice that said that he had been found. He looked closely at the inscription, wondering what it meant. Myung-woo asked if he was okay. Another notification appeared in front of his face, on which someone was apologizing looking at him. The guy said that there was something in the system window. He looked at it in surprise, ending the sentence by saying that he was apologizing for something. Suddenly his brother called out to him, causing him to quickly turn around. Looking to the side, he saw worried Yaram and Yuyun flying towards him. The guy covered his brother, and the girl covered them with her spear from the flames heading towards him. Yuyun sat on the ground next to his brother and worriedly asked if everything was okay with him. The guy looked at what was happening in shock and asked what it was, to which Yaram replied that it was an attack from the boss. The fields all around were blazing in scarlet flames. The guy exclaimed, asking what the boss meant, because the boss of a low-ranking dungeon cannot attack in such a radius. The bull with red eyes and curved horns looked ahead, and he was told that initially the boss should have been another huge mountain bull. This bull was pierced by the beak of a huge bird, and the girl added that suddenly that bird appeared and killed him. The heroes looked up, after which Yaram asked in shock what they would do, and wasn't the gate supposed to open after killing the monster? Yuyun told her that even though he died, the gate does not appear, and that means that bird took his place as the boss. Looking at the bird making a strong screech, the guy thought that they needed to defeat this boss in order to get out. Yu-Hyan took out a capsule with a return stone and, looking at the bird, said that it was the first time he had seen such a monster and did not know how dangerous it was, and, handing the capsule to his brother, told him to take it and, if something happened, at least he could get out. Yujin nervously looked at his brother's hand. He called out to him, but the guy did not answer. Memories from the past when he lost his brother appeared in his head, and he wondered if this time it would be the same, wondering if the powerful boss appeared because of failure to take measures in time. Then he remembered how his brother in the past, bleeding, also handed him a capsule, and the guy wondered if the younger brother would really go alone, just like then. He put his hand on his brother's while he told him to quickly take the capsule and leave. Holding his hand, he calmly said that he didn't need it. Yujin's eyes shone as he looked at the monster, and he said that the bird is weaker than Yuyun. The boss was circling above the ground, dropping fiery attacks. The guy said that it was a second-class monster, a golden-billed Mayan, and that it had a fire attribute, and the monster itself was the same level as the bosses of high-level or rank dungeons. Then the guy added that the bird's main weapon is its beak, and its weak point is the fragile skull bones compared to the rest of its body, and that the bird has a pair of spare wings, so Yuyun should go straight to the head. Sitting on the ground, the leader asked his brother how he knew this, to which he asked if it was suspicious. The guy wiped the sweat from his chin and said that they could talk after they got out. Looking at the bird approaching them, he thought that this time they would all get out, because now everything was different from his past, adding that he would not allow the same thing to happen again this time. Yu-Hyan sat on the ground behind his brother, who looked confidently ahead. He turned to Yaram and asked her to create a curtain with her breath. The girl stretched her arms forward and used icy breath, and aura began to accumulate in her hands. She raised her hand above her head, after which a large snowflake appeared above the heroes. Then the guy turned to his brother, who was holding the sword, and said that the bird remained with him. Yu-Hyan turned to the girl and asked her to take care of her brother. She looked him in the eyes confidently and told him not to worry. The guy again took out the capsule with the stone and put it in his brother's hand, saying that he could not trust it. He then drew his sword and rushed towards the monster across the burning field, Yujin shouting after him to aim for the head. The girl, holding the barrier, asked if he was sure of his choice because she has the skill of flying, To which the guy replied that she would have burned alive, because you can only resist the monster's flame with the same resistance to fire that his brother has. They watched as Yu-Yun blocked the bird's flames with his blade, and the guy added that although he did not have the skill of flying, he did, however, have something similar. The bird looked at the guy. Then she walked towards him with a squeal. The guy dodged the monster's powerful blow at the last moment. He looked at the bird while his brother shouted to him that the monster had opened. The guy turned to the bird, resting his foot on the ground. He raised his sword back with a stern expression on his face. The next moment, he struck the monster with an incredibly strong blow, cutting off its wing. Myungwoo admired the fact that the guy was able to cut off a wing with just one blow, and Yujin asked in shock why he was aiming for the wings. The bird flapped its wings, and the guy added that it had extra wings, and it was pointless. The bird rose into the air with explosive force. The guy looked at it in surprise. Opening her mouth, she launched a flame into him. The guy covered his face with his hands from the flame. Yujin looked at this in surprise and thought why his brother was not doing anything, but just standing on the ground, because he would have finished off the monster at once if he had gone up and hit him in the head. He remembered how his brother used the willow leaf skill in the past and thought that although he did not have the flying skill, he could use them, and then wondered if it might be that he had not yet obtained this skill. The bird in the air looked back. Suddenly she walked behind the guy straight towards Yujin and the others. Yu-Yun turned to his brother in fear. Yaram held the barrier in horror, asking the guy what they should do. The monster opened its mouth and began to accumulate energy. The girl shouted that it was rushing towards them. The heroes were very scared. Myungwoo grabbed the guy by the neck in horror. The girl with tears in her eyes asked if she could stop the monster. With her icy breath, Myungwoo whined and called the guy by name. Yujin coughed and asked to let him go. Yu-Hyan gritted his teeth as blue leaves began to appear in front of him. He activated the blue willow leaves. The technique enveloped the bird, causing it to stop and squeal. The guys looked at this in surprise. Yujin exclaimed joyfully that his brother could really use this technique. Looking at his brother, he said that now Yu-Hyan will. Without finishing the sentence, he noticed that his brother was standing with his hands raised. Yujin looked in shock as his brother waved his hands, standing under the bird, which was enveloped in willow leaves. The guy mentally asked what he was doing there. Suddenly Yu-Yun's attention was attracted by Yujin, who shouted to him that the technique was being used incorrectly and to advance. The guy put his hands to his face and shouted with all his might for his brother to step on the leaves and run along them. Yu-Yun was surprised by what he heard. He stepped on willow leaves. A second later, he looked in surprise at how his feet were standing on the floating leaves. Without taking his eyes off it, he said that now he could win. He pushed off sharply with his foot. A moment later, the guy was already running through the leaves above the bird's head. The monster opened its mouth, in which a sphere of energy appeared. A stream of fire shot out from the beak and headed towards Yu-Yun. The guy swung his sword and exclaimed that flames were just nonsense to him. He made a direct strike, and a column of dark flame hit the monster in the back, pinning him to the ground. The guy swung his blade again. The next blow hit the monster's head. Yu-Hyan was thrown away from the bird by the explosion. A huge amount of stones scattered to the sides. The girl covered herself with her hands, continuing to hold the curtain, on which fragments were falling. Yujin shouted to her not to lower the protection, otherwise they would all die. The dust around the monster's corpse swirled and began to dissipate, the bird's body sticking out of the ground. Yu-Yeon lifted his foot from the willow leaves. The guy went down to the ground. All his clothes were covered in blood. He turned to his brother, who called him by name. He watched as Yujin ran up to him, asking with a smile if he was okay, and if he was hurt. He grabbed his brother by the shoulders in delight, as he smiled and said that it was all thanks to him, and said with admiration that his idea was simply incredible. After which he asked how he came up with the idea of using willow leaves instead of the flying skill. The guys just beamed with joy. Yujin replied that he thought Yu-Yun had always used them that way. The guy replied that he didn't even suspect such a use. Yaram and Myungwoo stood aside. The girl awkwardly scratched the back of her head, while Yu-Hyan said that he always regretted that he did not have the skill of flying, but his brother solved his problem. To which the guy replied that it was nothing special. The girl thought that since he killed the Yujin listened with a smile, as his brother said that this was not a small thing, because it was like he had gained a new skill, and at that time he thought that since this made his brother so happy, then so be it, and that it was as if he had received a Christmas present in Children's Day at the same His brother looked into his eyes with delight and said that it all happened thanks to him, adding that he was the best. The dungeon gates opened. The guy awkwardly said that when they leave, he will look at the rest of his skills. The brother thanked him, and Yaram asked him to look at her skills. The people standing at the dungeon were fussily asking if everything was okay with the head. Yaram and Yuyun were surrounded by reporters who said that they were worried about them because the level of the dungeon had changed dramatically. The guy said that they suddenly had a rank boss. A man from the crowd said that it was a great relief that Yaram was okay. Yujin began to move away from the crowd and, pretending that they were strangers, listened to his brother say that this should be reported to the association, while thinking that it was better to keep a distance outside. Seonghin ran towards him very quickly, while the guy was thinking that he needed to quickly hand over his equipment and leave. The man shouted his name with all his might. He fell at the feet of the frightened guy, who had raised his leg, and began to ask if he was hurt, saying that he should have come with them. Yujin awkwardly said that he was fine, thinking that the mission of not being conspicuous had failed. Mangwu watched as the man rose to his feet, standing in front of the embarrassed guy, and told him to climb on his back because he needed to get back quickly, to which he awkwardly replied that he was fine. Mangwu looked down in disappointment. The skyscraper stood under the night sky. The guy turned to his brother, saying that he had arrived. The guy put the food on the table, saying that he had brought snacks from the administration and that they looked wildly expensive. Holding the bag by the handles, he looked back when he heard the sound of water and asked himself if Yuyun was washing himself, adding that he had recently gotten a lot of the boss's blood on him. The guy opened the door to the garden, deciding that while he would wait, he entered the garden with his arms wide apart. The animal ran towards him, and he finished his sentence with a smile, saying that at this time he could play with peace. The guy asked if he was okay, but the kid interrupted him by kicking him in the stomach with great force. The lion cub again spun the guy around, and Yujin, spinning in the air, said that he loved him. He lay down next to the baby, who was eating food, and again said with a smile that he loved him. Yujin lay down in the middle of the garden. All his clothes were torn off. Peace lay on his chest, and the guy wondered if the imposed effect of education would be enough, adding that he was dying of fatigue. He looked at the ceiling with a smile, saying that today he really thought he was going to die. He recalled strange notifications from the system, reasoning that there were too many strange things today, typos, and the fact that it seemed to be talking to him. He then remembered the boss fight, continuing to reason that there were a lot of strange things in the dungeon too, because a high-level monster appeared out of nowhere, and this only happened occasionally in the future. The guy got up and sat on the floor. The lion cub rolled off his chest. He turned pale with fright, wondering if this was all because he had turned back time. The animal, lying on its back, began to swear. The guy apologized to him, thinking that something had broken due to the time rollback. There was an emptiness in his head. He only thought that because of him, the phenomena that appeared in the future began to appear now, adding that if the system personally spoke to him because of this, he timidly wanted something to say, but stopped. The next second, he raised his hand up and shouted that this was not his problem, because the system should have explained everything clearly from the very beginning, adding that it was very unfriendly. He clicked on the skills icon, saying that with skills everything is the same. Although everything is written in detail, it is not clear what the code word is. Suddenly a holographic book opened in front of him, throwing him away. He looked at it in shock, asking what was wrong with the system window. The unknown girl ran her fingers over the interface, asking if the connection was stable. In front of the system window stood a girl, next to whom were two beastmen. The girl said that their contacts were very limited in time, and that they forcibly opened the channel. The centaur next to her said that they should have explained everything more clearly. The girl added that there is no time, but the guy, however, must figure it out, because they tried to make it as intuitive as possible, and then gave it a form that is familiar to his world. On one of the pages of the book, there were photographs of Yaram and Yuyun. Above them, there was an inscription that these were objects with the education effect completed. The guy was sitting on his knees, looking at the book, and asked if it was a magazine. He raised his hand and asked what was going on in the head of the creator of the system. He read the writing on the page out loud, asking if only S grades counted, then answered his own question by saying that judging by the fact that Myungwoo and Seong Han weren't, it was. He noticed that on the page there was the number 50 and a hen with her chicks wishing him good luck, asking if there were only 50 windows and what that good luck wish meant. Suddenly his brother entered the garden, wiping his head, apologized, and said that it took him a long time to wash himself. He looked at Yujin, sitting on the ground next to the system interface and the magazine, and asked if everything was okay with him because he was kind of pale. The guy wondered if the system wanted him to tame as many as 50 S-rank hunters. The furry monster sitting in the cage bared its teeth, looking at its prey with glowing red eyes. When the grate opened, he ran forward towards Peace, swinging his long claws. A loud impact sound was heard. Drops of dark blood began to fly in different directions. The camera filmed a breeding lion, which sat next to the defeated monster and licked blood from its paw. The voice-over noted that this is a subspecies of unicorns, flame-horned lion, Class 2. Day 2 of training the skill of taming animals. Eugen looked at the beast through his protective helmet and said that its current indicators are 51 centimeters in length and 5-6 kilograms in weight. He added that in the past 2 days, it had doubled in size. The guy behind whom the camera stood lifted the bars and noted with a smile on his face that the beast was a beast. He spread his arms with a satisfied face when Peace began to jump in his direction and said that he had done a good job. At that moment, the fiery lion hit his teacher in the stomach with his front paws, causing him to start coughing loudly, flying back. The guy smiled weakly as a bead of sweat ran down his face. Taking the beast wagging its tail in his arms, Eugen raised his fist up and loudly declared that this was a mere trifle, since he had rented all possible equipment to increase endurance and strength, after using which his indicators increased by 94 and 45 units. Last night, the man poured a light liquid into a glass with ice, asking about the animal tamer. The two brothers were sitting on the floor near the glass table, and Eugen raised his glass. He said that he got this skill after he reached level 10. Yaram asked him what he was doing. The elder brother opened his mouth slightly and began to bring the glass to him, simultaneously telling him that this was a skill that allowed him to influence animals. He added that it was an S-class skill, so it could be used on high-level monsters. At this moment, he thought that it was better to H. The younger brother was very surprised when he heard about the S-class. He rose to his feet with his eerie eyes burning and wrapped a rope around his hands, causing Eugen to stumble back. Yuyan began to reason that an S-class skill and an F-class body in such a dangerous world. Moreover, it is also a unique skill. His brother indignantly asked if he was really thinking of. The guy with a displeased face arched his index finger and began to exclaim that instead of hiding it, they should find a use for it. While Peace tried to steal a snack from the table with his paw, his teacher said that he could race him into a mount for his brother and could race him to have the. A picture appeared in his head of hunters sitting astride various animals. Eugen asked how many more S-class hunters need high-level mounts. He asked his brother to imagine how everything would change if the Abyss acquired them and could explore the huge dungeons on horseback. The guild leader froze, pursing his lips as Eugen noted that thanks to this skill, the course of clearing dungeons would greatly change. The guy thought that, fortunately, Peace was already under the effect. He threw the cub a small toy in the shape of a mouse, which he successfully caught with his teeth. He thought that if the system wanted him to educate 5 OS classes, the teacher put protective pads on his hands, which the fiery lion hit with all his might. They also ran at sunset, tying a large tire to the body of the beast. The guy thought that it would be better for him to train monsters and brainwash people. He buried his face in the floor of the training room while Peace sat on his back and moaned about how bad he felt. The fiery lion with a good-natured face looked at the teacher when he asked if he was tired. Eugen, with empty eyes, lay in a puddle of his own and said that he did not think that he would have to work so hard for this venture. He recalled how a bunch of monsters flew over the city, thinking that the more hunter riders appeared, the more effective the cleansing would be, which means there will be fewer dungeon breaks and Peace will be safer. He thought that, especially considering that over the years, there will be more dungeons. The guy abruptly turned over on his back and took Peace with his hands, closing his eyes. He exclaimed that his conscience did not allow him to simply relax and rest. He looked up in surprise when a voice from the side said that this was simply incredible. Simayong entered the room with a smile on his face and clapped his hands, saying that Eugen's practice had barely ended and he was already training here. Looking at the man, the guy rose to his knees, saying that Yu Yeon allowed him to use this premises. Simeon replied that he did not come here to kick him out. He looked at the fiery lion with a soft smile, noting that he had grown a lot in just a day of training. Peace, with one ear raised, sat calmly on the floor, hugging himself with his tail. Eugen, with a frightened face, jerked sharply as the man bowed in front of him and said that he was delighted and inspired. The guy was embarrassed by this action and indignantly asked what came over him. Without raising his head, Simeon began to apologize for all the times he was rude to him and underestimated him. He noted that he had demonstrated soothsaying and analytical ability, as well as his new skill. When he grabbed the guy with his arms well on his knees, he with an indignant face began to push away Simeon, who asked him to join the abyss and become the new wind-in world of hunters. Peace recalled how he flicked the teacher in different directions. Seeing how he was now doing the same to the man, Fujin shouted that he didn't want to, and that he didn't have the ability to do it. The man continued to ask, saying that they needed his strength. Turning blue, the guy clenched his teeth in anger, thinking that he was not at all insightful, but simply knew all the answers from the future. He remembered the unpleasant meeting with Simeon and thought that this person was unpleasant to him, and every time he went to the abyss, he became angry and upset because of his poisonous remarks. The man waved his hand, asking him to think again. Sitting on his knees and looking at the puzzled guy, he said that they would provide him with transportation for the monster cubs, food, and the necessary equipment. He added that they would do anything at his request. Yujin froze as a bead of cold sweat ran down his cheek. He presented an Egyptian fresco depicting him as a ruler, with Simeon as his servant. He suddenly remembered that these events did not happen in this life, and the man simply does not know all the horror that he had to endure. Because of him, he realized that he was now in charge. The guy grimaced sharply and muttered that he didn't need to. Humming the song, Yujin spread his arms to the sides with a satisfied face and said that his brother would still cover all the expenses. Looking at the training room, he added that since he was using them as a dormitory, then in general, he could sign a contract. The man immediately became inspired and waved his hand until a blue holographic window appeared. He said that if so, then it was worth doing right now. Yujin squatted down with a grin and patted P's head, saying that he had the condition that he should be a regular employee since he was going to be an independent hunter. He lifted the cub up and began to circle, noting that this way he could freely raise animals for other guilds and make a lot of money. When Simeon began to say that this was for the sake of the future of the abyss, he said that it did not concern him. The man's eyes widened in surprise when the guy said that the abyss, in any case, is the strongest guild in the country, so they simply would not easily fulfill this exclusive contract. While the beast was washing itself in his arms, Yujin looked away and began scratching his ear, saying that even he had an idea of how important the skill of taming magical beasts was, because thanks to it, clearing dungeons would become much more effective. He introduced the golden egg, saying that to high-ranking hunters, he was like a goose laying golden eggs. He asked how other guilds would react to this if the abyss wanted to take this skill into its own hands. He imagined a goose in a nest surrounded by many people with knives. The guy said that many are ready to use force if they cannot get something, and some are even poisoned by putting poison in their food. He noted that since he is F-class, he definitely won't die from this. Imagining a picture of how people would sit in front of the goose and she would give them golden eggs, he asked whether it would be better for him to be an independent hunter. Hugging the yawning piece, Yujin stuck out his index finger and said with a smile that he could raise one beast per guild in exchange for immunity and money. Looking at Simeon, he showed a thumbs up and noted that, of course, he would raise a fiery lion for them. So he asked to hire him and negotiate with other guilds for him. The man opened his mouth slightly when the guy continued to babble about salaries, bonuses, and social security. Touching his chin with his hands, he laughed, noting that, apparently, he could not cope with it, so he accepted the conditions. He pointed to the camera mounted on a tripod and asked if he could take the video from the training for negotiations. Yujin agreed. Simeon touched the camera and added that there was something else. Holding peace in his hands, the guy looked at the man. He began to ask if he would sign the hunter's contract in the event that Abyss became the strongest shields in the country. The guy lowered his head and replied that he didn't even know. He pointed to the man with glasses and asked if he was just trying to film this. He looked away, noting that he had been caught. Simeon turned around on the way out, hearing the question of what use would it be to them to hire him. Yujin, with peace on his shoulder, laughed sweetly and said that with his skill he was going to help them anyway. As he had nothing else, he said that if in the future he signs a contract and the man regrets it, it will not be his fault. He, in turn, went out into the corridor and laughed loudly, saying that he was amazed. Simeon walked along the bright corridor with the camera in his hands, asking how is it that there is nothing else. He watched the video with interest, saying that apparently Hunter Eugene had problems with self-esteem. He thought that he continued to surprise him every time he met. At this time, the guy in the training room with a joyful face was rolling on the floor, Holding peace in his hands and joyfully exclaiming that now he will have a salary and social benefits, he asked the cub if he saw Semiong stutter out of confusion. Remembering their long-ago meeting in his office, the man thought about that those with unique abilities imagine themselves to be someone unknown, and power intoxicates them and makes them arrogant. He thought that Eugen also seemed eccentric to him. But he is different from them, since he soberly assesses the prospects and managed to lead to negotiations that were beneficial to him. Imagining images of the two Han brothers in his head, he wondered if the guy had always been so gifted, but he did not notice it because of the genius of his younger brother. Simeon touched his glasses with his hands, saying that just imagining Yuan, Yaram, and Shang Han fighting in his head, he thought that he assumed that other guilds would begin to put pressure on Abyss, but she was willing to take such a risk. Then an image of Eugen appeared in his head, dressed in an expensive suit with gold accents, with an adult fiery Leo walking next to him. He thought that if the guy remained an independent hunter, then all attention would be focused on him, and not on the Abyss. He realized that this was both a great benefit and a great risk. The man lowered his head, asking if he didn't realize their weight, because he was far from the world of hunters. Raising his head, he straightened his glasses with his hand, and asked if it could be that he was doing this to protect his younger brother. While Eugen was playing with peace on his knees in the training hall, Simeon mentally noted that from now on the trophies of the largest guilds around the world would be focused on him. A man with dark hair sat on his desk and watched a video of a fiery lion on the screen. The girl in the fuchsia suit did the same. On the large, bright terrace, there was a chaise lounge on which a man was lying with a tablet in his hands. Touching his face with his fingers, he smiled, noting that he needed to go to the Abyss as soon as he cleared his schedule. The video showed Eugen sitting and petting a contented piece while holding him in his arms. Simeon thought that he would soon find out what a valuable figure he really was. With his hands folded on his belt, the guy stood opposite the large play complex and told Peace that his corner was now completely ready. He squatted down, letting the cub sniff the new territory, after which he asked if he liked it. He said that now they can live together in a dormitory. He said that it would most likely be crowded here when he grew up, and in that case. The guy smiled nervously when Vuk and Yaram entered the room, and the girl with enthusiastic eyes pounced on his back. She asked loudly, "Who is it?" The guy with long hair asked in fear why there was a monster here. Yuhayan opened the door to the room amidst caustic screams. He heard the girl exclaim that this cat was very cute. After which his older brother explained that it was not a cat at all. Myungwoo then screamed that the monster was biting him and asked to be saved, to which Eugen explained to Peace that he turned to his brother, holding the angry beast in his arms, while the girl with a joyful face tried to pet him, and the bitten guy with long hair sat on the floor. The teacher said hello and asked what happened. Yuhayan asked him to step away with him for a minute. The elder brother looked at his family member with worried eyes and said that he would come over now. While expensive cars were cutting through the city streets, the guy shouted loudly, asking if the guild heads were really coming here to meet him. The two brothers walked out into a large, bright corridor. Yuhayan said that he could very well refuse and not see them. Eugen replied that he couldn't do that. He walked ahead with Peace in his arms, and the head of the Abyss walked behind him, saying that these are S-class hunters, and hunters who are a lower class usually find it difficult to deal with them. The elder brother agreed with his words. With a grim face, he grabbed him sharply by the shoulder as the guy muttered that he would just tell them to go back. Eugen asked indignantly, how could he continue to behave like this towards the guild heads? As people in suits walked along the corridors, he asked how the fact that the leaders of the three guilds personally came to the Abyss would affect public opinion. He himself answered, saying that everyone would be surprised and realize that the guild has influence, after which they themselves would. The teacher stepped forward, holding the fiery lion on his shoulder and sticking his thumb up. He said he needed to show himself at least once. Yun began to say that, but however, Eugen interrupted and said that from now on, he was forbidden to say that word. Opening the door, he began to enter the room, saying that since they were going to negotiate, personally evaluate everything,